This is the Extras Academy Survival Guide, the story of a gamer who wakes up inside a game he has already beaten 5 times. As the tutorial villain who never survives the first act, he knows every death that is coming. Watch him dodge them all. This is the complete Season 1, start to finish. Imagine you wake up inside a game, not as the hero, not even as a side character. You wake up as the villain the tutorial was built to throw away. A deserted noble named Ed Rothtaylor, written to lose, written to die, written to make the real protagonist look good. That's the part everyone forgets. The villain knows he's the villain because this guy, he played the game. He memorized the whole story. Every duel, every boss, every tragic ending, he's read the script. So when the third princess herself hunts him down in the woods and orders him to vanish, a princess whose insight skill can feel any lie the moment you speak it, he doesn't run. He doesn't beg. He beats her, without lifting a finger, using nothing but her own pride against her. And that's the exact second he stops being a character in the story and decides to become the author of it. He rewrites duels he was supposed to lose. He saves people the plot wanted dead. He turns final bosses into allies. But here's the thing, none of that is how far he's willing to go. By the end of this man fakes his own death, stands in the crowd at his own funeral, and breaks a time loop he was never even supposed to know existed. One gamer, one memorized story. The entire Season 1 of the Extras Academy Survival Guide, start to finish. Stick with me because the moment he goes off script, even he stops knowing what happens next. So picture this. You spend years grinding a brutal fantasy RPG called The Failed Swordsman of Sylvania. You beat it 5 times, you know every boss, every betrayal, every scripted death, and then you close your eyes one night and you wake up inside it, except you don't open your eyes as the hero. You open them as the guy the game throws away in the first 10 minutes, the disposable tutorial villain. That's our guy, that's Ed Rothtaylor. And the first thing he sees when he wakes up is a status screen hovering in the air. He's hoping for something, anything, a hidden talent, a broken stat. A reason to believe the universe didn't just hand him the worst possible body in the entire story. He reads the numbers, and his soul leaves his body. The stats are garbage, bottom of the barrel. Ed Rothtaylor, son of a duke. Spoiled little brat who exists in this game for exactly one reason: to get publicly humiliated, disinherited, and kicked out of Sylvania Academy so the real protagonist can look good doing it. That's his whole arc. That's the entire point of him. He's a speed bump. But here's the thing, Ed isn't just some NPC who got unlucky. Ed knows the script, every page of it, and if you know the script, you don't have to follow it. So he sits there in this fancy room that's about to stop being his, and he runs the math. The canon version of Ed gets expelled, gets cut off, and spirals into a pathetic nothing of a life. That's the good ending the game wrote for him. And Ed looks at that ending and just refuses it. He's not going to rage against the plot. He's not going to try to become the hero. His stats literally won't let him. No, his plan is quieter than that and honestly way smarter. He's going to use everything he remembers about this world, keep his head down, survive the academy, graduate without anyone noticing him, and then go live a long, comfortable, boring life far away from every single death flag in this story. Win by not playing, that's the dream. There's just one problem with that dream. Before he can graduate quietly, he has to survive. And right now he has no money, no allies, and a name that everyone in this kingdom associates with a family of doomed villains. So Ed does the only thing the script doesn't account for. He runs northeast into the forest, away from the academy, away from the nobles, away from the plot. And this is where the recap gets real, because the next stretch of his life is not glamorous at all. See, in this world, magic burns calories. You cast a spell, you get hungry fast, and Ed, with his trash stats, can barely cast anything without his stomach screaming. So out in the wilderness he starts starving. We're talking gnawing on tree bark, starving. He literally tries to eat bark and throws it right back up. This is the spoiled duke's son. This is the guy who woke up in silk sheets that morning. Now he's puking in the dirt because he ate a tree. And just when it looks like the disposable villain is going to die a disposable death alone in a forest before the story even gets going, something unlocks. A new window appears, the crafting system. Here's the genius of it. Ed's stats are terrible, but his talent was never in magic. It's in his hands. The boy can build, and the game just handed him a system that turns that talent into survival. So he gets to work. He builds a shelter. He carves himself a harpoon. He goes down to the water and he fishes. And for the first time since waking up in this nightmare, Ed Rothtaylor sits down to a real meal he made with his own 2 hands. He's not the duke's son anymore. He's not the tutorial villain anymore. He's just a guy who figured out how to live. And for a second, it almost feels like he got away with it. He did not get away with it. Because right there, mid-bite, mouth full of fish, the worst possible person walks out of the trees. A girl, platinum hair, radiating that unmistakable "I am extremely important and you are not" energy. And Ed's blood goes cold because he knows exactly who she is. This is Phonia, third princess of the empire, and she did not stumble onto him by accident. She hunted him down, and she has one thing to say. Leave, disappear from Sylvania Academy, get out and never come back. Now why does a princess care so much about one washed-up villain hiding in a forest? Because of what Phonia can do. Her skill is called insight, and insight is exactly as scary as it sounds. She can detect lies. She can smell a conspiracy. When she looks at you, she sees straight through whatever story you're trying to sell. And during the Academy's admission exam, she caught Ed cheating. That's how she found him. That's why she's standing in his camp telling him to vanish. In her eyes, he's a cheat and a liability, a Rothtaylor, a name soaked in trouble. And she has decided personally that he does not belong at Sylvania. And here's the trap Ed's in. He can't fight her. Are you kidding? She's a princess with a truth-detecting superpower and combat skills that make his look like a joke. If he lies, she'll know. If he begs, she'll see through it. Insight means every single normal trick is off the table. So what does Ed do? He does the one thing insight can't punish. He tells the truth. He drops to his knees, and he thanks her, genuinely, and insight lights up because it's real. See, Ed actually means it, and here's why. The Rothtaylors are a family of villains in this story, and every single one of them is fated to be destroyed by the end. Being disinherited, being cast out, being the disposable nobody who runs off into a forest that didn't ruin Ed's life. That saved it. It cut him loose from the death flag tied to his own family name. So when he kneels and thanks the princess who exiled him, Insight reads it as 100% sincere, and Phonia has no idea what to do with that. She came here expecting a scheming little villain. She got a guy who's grateful she ruined him. The whole confrontation just tilts sideways. But Ed isn't done. Because gratitude alone doesn't get her off his back, she can still expel him whenever she wants. He needs to take that power away from her entirely, and to do that, he's going to use the one weapon she can't see coming, her own pride. Here's the setup. Ed clocked something the moment she arrived. Phonia came out here alone, no escort, no classmates, because she's secretly taking Professor Glass' placement test, the one that sorts students into the elite Class A. The test is simple: go into the forest and find the magic beads. Find the right one and you've proven you belong at the top. And Ed, who has played this game 5 times, knows exactly where the best bead in the whole forest is hidden. The golden one, the big prize. So he guides her, subtly, steers the proud princess straight toward the guardian tree of the forest's guardian spirit. And there, just like he knew it would be, sits the golden bead, the instant ticket to Class A, the thing she came all the way out here to find. It's right in front of her, all she has to do is take it. And she won't. This is the twist, and this is where you realize Ed didn't outfight her or outlie her, he outread her. Phonia is too proud to claim a prize she was handed. She didn't find this bead with her own skill. Ed led her to it. And to a princess whose entire identity is built on earning her place, on being above tricks and handouts, taking that golden bead would be cheating. It would be the one thing she despises, so she refuses it. She turns and walks away from the easy win, and she fails to place into Class A. You catch what just happened? Ed weaponized her pride against her. He knew she'd rather fail honestly than succeed on a gift. And by failing the placement, by not landing in that elite class, Phonia loses the standing, the authority to throw him out of the academy. The one person hunting him just disarmed herself. And she did it thinking she was being noble. That's the kind of villain Ed actually is. Not strong, not flashy, just 3 moves ahead of everybody. She's not happy about it, by the way. As she leaves, she fixes him with a look and makes him a promise. I'll be watching you. So neutralized, sure, but not gone. File that away, because that princess and her truth-detecting eyes are going to come back around, and Insight versus a guy who knows the future is a matchup that is nowhere near finished. And then we jump. The survival arc is over. The standoff is over. Term begins and Ed Rothtaylor walks back through the gates of Sylvania Academy, the same place that was supposed to chew him up and spit him out in the tutorial. First day of class. He's hanging by a thread, one wrong move and he's expelled for real. But Phonia, for all her watching, doesn't hand him over to the headmaster. The disposable villain made it to school. In class, his combat path gets revealed. Ed's an archer, and that fits him perfectly, honestly. He's not the guy who charges in with a blazing sword. He's the guy at the back, reading the field, taking the one shot that matters. Keep that in your head: distance, patience, knowing where to aim. That's Ed in a single word. And then she shows up, and the whole tone of this story quietly changes. Janica Failover, top of the class. A genius spirit summoner, she can call and command spirits like it's nothing, which in this academy makes her a prodigy. And here's the catch that makes her human: she's not noble. She's a poor farmer's daughter surviving on scholarship money, holding her spot at the top of an academy full of rich kids through pure raw talent. The forest spirit at the guardian tree apparently told Janica about Ed. so Janica turns. And she looks at the disposable villain and she smiles at him. Now, you'd think that's a good thing, a friendly face, the prodigy of the class actually being warm to the guy everyone else treats like garbage. And Ed's reaction is to pretend he can't see spirits at all just to keep his distance from her. Why would he push away the one person being kind to him? Because Ed knows who Janica is. Janica Failover is the final boss of Act 1. The poor, kind, brilliant farm girl who smiles at the villain on day 1. She's the storm waiting at the end of this arc. Ed remembers her tragic future. He remembers exactly where this road takes her. And so even as she smiles at him, even as she offers the one bit of warmth he's been shown since he got here, he does not smile back. He can't let himself. Getting close to Janica means getting tangled in the worst tragedy of the early game, and Ed's whole plan is to avoid death flags, not befriend them. There's a smaller, more pathetic beat in here too, and I love it. Ed is dead broke. Remember, he ran into a forest with nothing, ate bark, fished with a homemade harpoon. He has no money, so at some point he actually has to ask Janica, the scholarship farm girl, for cash. The doomed villain mooching off the future final boss. It's awkward, it's a little humiliating, and it tells you everything about how far this proud, noble name has fallen. But the chapter doesn't end on awkward. It ends on a gut punch that flips this whole avoid Janica plan on its head, because as the day winds down, Ed comes across someone else entirely. A girl, fast asleep. This is Lucy Merrill, and without spoiling more than the game already screamed in Ed's face, Lucy is, flat out, the strongest character in this entire story. The kind of power that breaks the rules of the plot. And she's just napping, bored like none of this matters to her. And looming over her, a giant spirit turns its attention to Ed, and it doesn't threaten him, it pleads, it delivers a message that lands like a curse and a quest all at once. Save Janica at all costs. Save Janica? The exact girl Ed has spent all day trying to keep at arm's length, the final boss of Act 1, the one death flag he was determined never to touch. The universe just looked him dead in the eye and told him, that one, you don't get to walk past that one. And remember when Ed decided his whole strategy was to keep his head down, graduate quietly, and avoid every single death flag in the story? Yeah, the story just heard that plan and laughed. Because the quiet life is over before it ever started. The script is already pulling him in. There are duels coming, scripted ones, fights the game wrote with predetermined endings, losses Ed is supposed to swallow, and the disposable villain is about to walk straight into the first one. The only question is whether he plays the part the game wrote for him or whether he breaks it. And trust me, what he does next, nobody saw it coming. Because here's the part that should make Ed feel safe, knowing the future is supposed to be a cheat code. But the thing about a script you've already read is that it only protects you if you stay in your seat and watch. The moment the camera turns toward you, the moment the story decides you're a player and not a spectator, the walkthrough stops working. And that's the trap Ed is about to walk straight into. It starts with a duel, just a duel. Scripted, predictable, the kind of beat Ed has seen play out 100 times across his 5 clears. In the game, this match ends one way and one way only, a flat, ugly word stamped across the screen. Lost, game over for whoever stands in this spot. And Ed is standing in this spot. He steps onto the floor already knowing the ending, already feeling the weight of a defeat that hasn't happened yet. Because in the world of the failed swordsman of Sylvania, this is where the loser loses. His opponent moves, the crowd expects one thing, the script expects one thing, and then Ed does something the script never accounted for. He reaches for his mana and what comes out isn't the flashy, lightning-bright magic everyone's braced for. It's green, soft, strange, smelling like cut grass on a summer field. It's his signature, the thing that makes him, not a healer's glow, not a duelist's bolt, just this quiet, impossible green that doesn't belong in anyone's expectations. And with it, the duel breaks, the lost never lands, the ending the game promised simply doesn't arrive. Now, Ed tells himself this is fine. This is still within his knowledge. He's just nudging a small outcome, smoothing one bad beat into a good one. But here's the thing, once you change one ending, the next ending changes too. The dominoes were already standing in a perfect line and Ed just flicked the first one. Because the duels don't stop. They come at him in a string one after another, each one a beat that the game wrote to end in a clean, brutal game over. And each time Ed breaks it with that same green mana that nobody can read. The princess is watching all of this. Phonia third princess, the girl with insight, the skill that pries truth out of a lie like a knife under a fingernail. She stares at Ed doing the impossible, breaking endings that aren't supposed to break. And her face says everything. Skepticism. The look of someone whose lie detector keeps coming back clean on a person who absolutely should be lying. Is that really all there is to him? She can't tell, and not being able to tell is, for her, the most unsettling thing in the world. And just when Ed thinks he's got the rhythm of it, break the duel, walk away, repeat, the story stops sending duelists, it sends a deal. A merchant approaches, sharp-eyed, golden-tongued, the kind of person who measures you in coin before she's finished saying hello. She wants to buy his time, not his loyalty, not his sword, his hours, like he's a commodity she's already decided is undervalued. And Ed, who is broke, who has been broke since the moment this story dropped him into the floor, has to actually consider it. Remember when he had to beg classmates for pocket money just to eat, that Ed hasn't gone anywhere. The broke transmigrator is still in there, still doing math on every meal. So when someone offers to put a price on him, part of him is genuinely tempted. That's the texture of this whole stretch. Ed is rewriting endings with magic nobody understands. And he still can't afford lunch. Keep that redhead in your head, by the way. She has a name and it's going to matter more than anyone in this building realizes. But the deals and the duels are just the noise before the real thing. Because something darker is moving underneath all of this. A forbidden kind of power. The kind that the script keeps in a locked room until exactly the wrong moment, and the wrong moment is now. Ed recognizes it. Of course he recognizes it. He's seen this entire arc play out 5 times. He knows what this threat is, knows where it's headed, knows how badly it ends for the people standing nearby. And knowing it should mean he stays out of it. The smart move, the spectator's move, is to step back and let the script run its course, because that's how you survive a story you've already memorized. He doesn't step back. He steps in, and his body, let's be clear about this, his body is garbage. We established that at the very start. Terrible stats, no real combat pedigree, talent in his hands, not his fists. He is by every metric the game ever gave him the wrong person to throw at something this dangerous, so he gets hurt. He gets knocked around, bloodied, pushed to the edge of what a body this fragile can take. And there's this moment in the middle of it where you can see the cost written all over him, the exhaustion, the pain, the raw animal effort of just staying upright. He thinks about what this is. The life of a beast, surviving by tooth and instinct because the brain that knows the future can't stop the fist that's already swinging. And this is the hinge the whole season turns on. Because lying there, bloodied, knowing exactly how this scene is supposed to go, Ed makes a choice that quietly detonates everything that came before it. He decides to stop following. From now on, he says, and you have to understand what these words cost, coming from a guy whose entire survival plan was do not touch the plot. From now on, I'll intervene in the storyline. That's it, that's the pivot. Up to this point, Ed has been the world's best-informed audience member. He had the walkthrough, he knew the boss patterns, the death flags, the exact frame where everything goes wrong. And he used all of it to do one thing: stay out of the way. To graduate quietly, live comfortably, never become a character the story cares about. But you can't watch people you've come to care about walk into endings you know are coming and keep telling yourself you're just a player. At some point the controller isn't enough. At some point you put it down and you climb into the screen. And the second he says it, the second he stops being the reader and starts being the author, the fight changes. The thing they're up against is a boss-class horror, a demon wearing menace like a second skin, and now it's not a scripted encounter Ed is enduring. It's a problem Ed is solving. Phonia moves with him, the skeptic, the lie detector, the princess who couldn't read him, fighting at his side now, because whatever she still doesn't understand about Ed Rothtaylor. She understands that he's the one standing between everyone and the dark. They hit it together. Light spears through the shadow. The demon's form buckles, twists, tries to become something worse. And then it goes off script entirely. Something happens that even Ed didn't see in 5 playthroughs, a moment where the story he memorized stops matching the story in front of him. And for one heartbeat nobody, not even the guy with the walkthrough, knows what comes next. What the hell is happening? That's the feeling. The map and the territory coming apart. And in that gap, that terrifying little gap where knowledge fails, Ed does the only thing left to do. He commits. Everything he has, that green mana sharpened to a single edge, driven straight into the heart of the thing. The blow lands, and the demon doesn't stagger or retreat, it's destroyed, unmade in a burst of crimson that wipes the threat off the board completely. And then quiet, the kind of calm that only ever comes after something that almost killed you. Sunlight, stillness, the sense that the worst of it is, for now, behind them. Ed is standing. The people he refused to abandon are standing. The ending the game promised, the loss, the game over, never got to write itself. He took the pen. But here's the thing, and it's the thing that should keep you watching. Somewhere off to the side, somewhere none of them can see, there's a figure, masked, watching. And as the dust settles on the demon Ed just erased, they laugh. Not a panicked laugh, not a defeated one, a delighted one. The laugh of someone who is enjoying this, who maybe even arranged it, who looks at the chaos Ed just walked through and finds it entertaining. Ed broke the script, and it's starting to look like somebody somewhere wanted the script broken, or at least is very, very pleased to see it happen. We don't know who, we don't know what they want. But the moment Ed declared himself the author, he announced himself to whoever else has been writing in the margins, and that schemer just heard the announcement loud and clear. Ed doesn't see any of that though. In the aftermath, in the ordinary sunlit hours that follow the academy halls, the small interactions, the people who smile at him now without an agenda, something settles in his chest that he hasn't felt since the day this world swallowed him. He came into this story as the disposable tutorial villain, the deserted son, the guy whose whole plan was to disappear into the background and survive. And somewhere between breaking endings and bleeding for people the game told him to ignore, the background became something else. I have a home now, he thinks. And it's not a victory line, it's quieter than that, more dangerous than that, because a man with nothing to lose is easy. A man with a home is a man who can be hurt. He's not a spectator anymore. He's a player with stakes, with people, with a place he's decided to defend. The walkthrough is closed from here on. Ed is writing, and the story is about to hand him a much bigger pen than he's ready for. Because everything up to this point, the survival, the duels, the demon, the declaration, that was Ed learning that he could change things. What comes next is the world handing him the means to change everything. There's a book waiting for him. An old, dangerous thing, the kind of power that doesn't fit in a margin. A grimoire, and the hall where the next act of his life begins is called Opheles Hall. He decided to become the author. Now the story's about to ask him exactly how far he's willing to take that, and the answer is going to cost him a lot more than a few bad endings. Stay with me, because Act 2 is where the survival guide stops being about survival. Here's a question you don't expect a villain to ask. Have you ever killed someone? And the person asking isn't some hardened assassin. It's a ruined merchant girl with red hair, sitting in the dark while an entire dormitory burns down around her on purpose. That's where we're headed now. So buckle in, because this is where Ed stops being a guy who survives his own death scenes and starts becoming the thing the story can't predict. But let's start in the calm, because the calm before this is the whole point. Ed has finished it, his log hut in the northern woods. Floor, fireplace, fence, the whole thing built with his own 2 hands. Remember the crafting system, the talent in his hands that kept him alive in that forest. This is what it grows into. To Ed, it isn't a hobby, it's a survival base, a place to fall back to when the plot comes for him. And Janica Failover shows up, that pink-haired spirit sorcerer. The prodigy who smiled at him on day 1, and she just stares at it. She can't believe one person did all of this alone. She's genuinely, openly impressed by him, and that matters because Janica doesn't get impressed. Janica flinches at kindness. By the fire, Ed's actually stressed about money, about paying back Phonia, paying back Lortel Ketchelm, paying back the friends who fronted his tuition. And Janica gives him this answer that's so quiet and so broken it changes the air. She says, if you can't pay them back, just don't. And here's why that lands like a punch. Remember that tragedy Ed kept trying to keep her away from. This is the wound underneath it. The weight of everyone's sincerity, everyone's help. All that tuition money people kept pressing into her hands, it crushed her. So she ran. She moved out of the elite hall and down into the run-down one just so she'd owe people less. She'd rather have nothing than be in debt to someone who's kind to her. That's the wound, hold onto it. It's going to detonate before this act is over. And then, almost like she's apologizing for being honest, Janica offers Ed her own hut as a hideaway. And she makes a vow, if he's ever overwhelmed, ever, she will help him at all costs. At all costs. Write that one down too. Because right here the story changes gears. Act 2 is starting, and the engine of Act 2 is that worn-out, half-forgotten book I told you about, the Sage-Sealed Grimoire. That book is about to summon a storm that swallows the whole academy. And somewhere off in the dark, Phonia, the third princess, the girl whose insight skill sniffs out every lie, she's hunched over ledgers, scheming about money. Because the battlefield this time isn't swords, it's money. So the rain comes down, and it's not fair rain. The elite Opheles Hall kids get carriages and boats home. The lower decks Hall kids get stranded, soaked, stuck. And resentment is a resource, somebody's farming it. That somebody pulls a string and Opheles Hall gets occupied, taken over from the inside by its own furious have-nots. Now Ed knows this event cold. He's read this game, he knows the script. The first floor mid-boss who's supposed to guard the hall is a guy named Tote the decoy. Easy roll, show up, look scary, lose, leave, except Tote fainted. And in a story that always finds the worst possible casting, guess who slides into the open boss slot? Ed, hooded, planted on the stairs, recognized by his own classmates. Internally screaming the only sane question available. So why the hell did I become a middle boss? But before the doors open, somebody comes to hire him. And this is the introduction you've been waiting for. Remember that sharp-eyed redhead who tried to buy Ed's time? Here she is, full reveal. Lortel Ketchelm, the golden daughter, a red-headed merchant prodigy and the hidden villain pulling the strings on this entire occupation. She rolls up to Ed's hut assuming his bad reputation means he's bitter, that he wants revenge on the hall that kicked him out. Perfect mark. She thinks angry, useful, cheap. And Ed plays it. He negotiates like a guy who knows his own worth is fictional. He'll perform his role in moderation, he says, for 20 gold coins. 20. They shake on it. She thinks she just bought a disposable little revenge boy. What she actually bought is the one person in the world trying to drag this twisted story back onto its rails. Neither of them knows yet how badly they've misjudged each other. There's one more quiet beat tucked in here, and it's going to hurt later. Janica, blushing, asks Ed to meet her tomorrow night. 9 p.m., the rose garden in front of Ophely's hall. She promises she'll explain why, then she runs off red-faced. Remember the time? 9 p.m. Rose Garden. The story does not forget it, and neither should you. Night falls, the occupation begins. Ed in disguise plays the passionate revolutionary, throws the doors of Ophely's hall wide open and sends the lower students charging upstairs, Willing at the front, the loudest believer, the one who's going to take the fall for all of it. And Ed knows that. He thinks, I'm sorry, toughen up, Willing, because he's already done the math on who survives this story and who pays for it. And then in the middle of her own coup, Rothtaylor does the thing villains aren't supposed to do. She gets honest. That question, have you ever killed someone? Ed says no. And she admits she's done things like it. She's crushed people's lives to keep her own. She betrays first so no one can betray her first. That's how you earn a name like Golden Daughter, and under all of it she's just lonely. She basically asks Ed to feel sorry for her, to understand, to absolve her a little. And here's the spine of who Ed is, said out loud. He refuses. He tells her, you take responsibility for your own decisions. That person, the one who could forgive you for all of it, that person is not me. Cold, clean, and she leaves to go do her part anyway because the scheme doesn't care about her feelings either. But here's the thing, while Ed's down in the lobby running his con, Janica is standing in the rain at the Rose Garden at 9 p.m., exactly where she asked him to be, and he's not coming. He can't come. He's busy being a boss in a burning building, but she doesn't know that. All she knows is what her spirits told her, that a whole parade of girls have been visiting Ed's camp. Phonia, Jix, even Rothtaylor, and it breaks her heart. She stands there fussing over her hairpin, so embarrassed for caring, and then she stops waiting and walks straight toward Ophely's hall. Toward exactly the place Ed needs her to never go. Keep that collision course in your head. It's the whole climax. Upstairs, the trap springs. Rothtaylor makes the hall's defensive magic go haywire and hands the runes to Willing, who swells up into the big stage boss. Ed's job is simple on paper. Stall on the stairs until the hero kicks the door in. And the hero arrives. Tanya, Rothtaylor's party, storms the hall, the swordsman, the alchemist, and the mage, Jix. They find Ed planted on the staircase as the mid-boss in their way, and they demand answers. What's happening upstairs? Why are you blocking us? Ed says nothing, so they make him talk the only way adventurers know how. They attack. Jix throws a wind blade. The sword charges, and the alchemist, now certain something valuable is upstairs, rips open her bag of tools and casts ignition. The lobby becomes a river of fire, and right in the middle of it, Ed is reading everything. Every angle, every step, cold and precise. But then Jix powers up, flames pouring off, magic spiking way past what any second year should have, and Ed feels the floor drop out of his certainty. This isn't just high proficiency. Jix is far, far stronger than the script promised. Ed mutters it like a warning to a friend who cheated on a test. You can't be leaving out information like that. And that's when it gets so much worse and so much better. Because now we see Ed actually fight, and it's not muscle. It's engineering. The alchemist, the Golden Daughter herself, realizes the awful truth. Alchemists are nearly helpless in a fight without their tools and elixirs, and she bragged about traveling light. No ring, no charm, nothing. And she pieces together what Ed did. He dropped the chandelier, ran a wall of fire through the gap, and aimed the whole thing at the strap of her reagent bag. He disarmed her before the fight even started. She fights back dirty. She throws her formula into the flames to drive them mad and summons a giant burning beast, while the frail green-eyed student panics trying to put the fire out. And Ed keeps his focus very deliberately on the weak one, because every second he holds that lane is a second the real threat, the swordsman in the red jacket, can't close the distance. He taunts, you think you can take him down if you get close. Then he kills the fire beast with chemistry, moth flower reagent and bile mushroom and a release spell, and the monster freezes into a blue petrified corpse. Rothtaylor goes for the soft spot. She mocks the one thing that's supposed to be his shame. You know what this means, Mr. Mage who can't even use magic. But Ed's already 3 moves ahead. The swordsman comes in with an elemental strike and Ed lures him on a spilled oil. The party screams that this is Ophely's hall, that people will die, but Ed already cleared every flammable thing out. Open window, no rug, nothing to catch. And the elemental blow detonates into a controlled fireball that swallows the whole party in light. A demolition disguised as a disaster. Now, the climax, the one beat this entire act has been pointing at. Remember Janica walking toward the hall, remember her vow at all costs. We cut to her and she's replaying the note Ed left. A note so out of character it was clearly meant to keep her away from Ophely's hall on purpose. And she realizes the truth and it guts her. Ed pulled her out. Ed sent her off to wait in a rose garden, and then he fought alone, fought until he bled, for one reason, to keep her out of this fight, because Janica has already been punished once after her own incident. She can't afford to be caught in another. So he took the whole thing on himself and let her think he stood her up. And she's standing there realizing she was worried about her hairpin, about how she looked while he was bleeding to protect her. And something opens up. Her eyes go red. A third eye mark burns onto her forehead. The enemies feel it instantly and panic. She's an enemy, and Janica just says calm as still water that she's not all that curious about their little plan. And she shatters the floor. Ed, bleeding, calls her name Janica and she answers him gently, "It's okay." And she steps in front of him to shield him and the room goes dead silent. Then she calls them. 4 giant spirits rise around her, a green bird, a blue water dragon, a golden earth golem, a fire tiger. Because here's the thing the story buried, Janica is the strongest second year in the entire magic faculty. The poor girl who moved into the rundown hall to owe people less is, when she finally lets go, a monster. And the enemies take one look and decide to run. All except the hero. Tanya refuses to fold, not because she thinks she can win, because she has to. "I have to do it," she insists and charges the golem head-on. The narration calls it plainly. It was clear as day this one would live the life of a hero. And Ed, bleeding, furious, protected for once instead of doing the protecting, just yells, "Go when I'm telling you to go." Gold light swallows the room. And in that whiteout, with Janica awakened above him and the hero refusing to die, Ed leans in to say 4 words that turn this whole occupation on its head. Listen carefully. Because everything you just watched, the burning hall, the boss fight, the bleeding stand on the stairs, none of it was the real plan. The golden daughter, the grimoire, the occupation, it's all bait. And the man it's meant to lure is just now arriving at a collapsing dormitory in person. The Golden King, Elt, and Ed is the only one who knows he's coming. So the tower is falling, Tanya is climbing, and Ed is bleeding on the stairs, and you still think this whole occupation is about a building. It isn't, it never was. Here's the part nobody upstairs understands. While Tanya's party smashes through the second-floor boss, the gloomy Clebius Nortondale, forced to switch sides mid-fight, and steamrolls the third-floor twin boss who's helpless without her sister, Ed is sitting on one truth they don't have. He knows the script. And the script is not the script everyone's living. The real story was never rebel student sees a dorm. The real story is a daughter coming to bury her father. Let me say that cleaner, because this is the spine of the whole arc. The merchant girl, the golden daughter Lortel Ketcheln, everything she built, the occupation, the unrest, the whole stage collapse was bait. Bait to lure one man into Sylvania Academy. The grimoire, the sage-sealed grimoire everyone's been whispering about, the cursed book that's supposed to swallow the school, it was never the prize, it was a worm on a hook. You dangle a priceless artifact in front of a greedy king and the king comes running. And the king she wants in that room is Elt Ketcheln, the Golden King, head of the Elt Merchant Association, the man who raised her. The man who murdered her real parents and adopted the orphan he made. And remember when Lortel cornered Ed during the occupation and asked him almost gently, "Have you ever killed someone?" Remember how she confessed she'd done similar things to survive, crushing people, betraying first so no one could betray her, and how she begged him to just sympathize with her. You thought that was a villain looking for a soft spot. It wasn't. It was a girl alone, standing at the edge of the only revenge she had left, asking the one person who wouldn't lie to her to tell her she wasn't a monster for it. Ed wouldn't give her that? You take responsibility for your decisions, that person is not me. Cold and right, but now he's the only one in the building who knows what she's actually walking into, and he's decided he's not going to let her walk into it alone. Because Ed has the evidence. He's holding the paper that proves the whole plan, Lortel's scheme laid out, signed in consequence. In the wrong hands that document is a noose around her neck. In his it's a lever. And down on the stairs the chief maid Alice, the one quietly steering this entire collapse, corners a half-blind, half-deaf, red-haired mercenary and lets a secret slip. The orphanages Elt secretly funds, the children he keeps as leverage. Then she says it flat. "Don't move, Mr. Elt will arrive at Ophelie's hall soon." And just like that you understand Alice isn't fighting for Elt. Alice is the third hand pulling this man toward his own grave. 3 people in this building know how the story really flows. Lortel, Alice, and Ed. The explosion hits, willing the hostage rigged to feed the building's defense magic through a crystal in the control room. A child holding a loaded gun, as the story puts it, finally breaks and the runaway magic detonates the whole hall. Tanya's party gets swallowed in it. When the dust clears, they find a red-haired alchemist crumpled in the rubble and someone screams her name, "Lortel, are you okay?" And Ed, watching from the shadows, makes a brutal little call. He leaves her, not because he doesn't care, because the script guarantees Tanya's people will find her and pull her out. The cruelest thing he can do for her right now is trust the story to do its job. So Ed peels off. He moves to hold the line from outside to keep the cavalry out and let the events inside run exactly as they're supposed to. And he limps down to the main hall on the first floor, bleeding, nearly empty on mana, and plants himself in the doorway, because something is coming through it. And that's when it gets so much worse. Because the Golden King doesn't send a proxy, he comes himself, a dark-skinned man in a fur-collared coat lit with blue flame, surrounded by a hooded retinue because Elt Ketcheln doesn't even trust his own men. Ed stares him dead in the eye and you can hear the disbelief crack through him. No way, you're Elt Ketchelm, president of the Elt Merchant Association. The final boss of this whole act just strolled into a collapsing building in person, and a wounded gamer with no mana left is the only thing standing between him and the daughter trying to destroy him. Now flashback 10 minutes. In the rubble, the big muscle mage Jix, who literally punched a hole through his own wall to get to Ed, is cracking jokes, asking if Ed and Janica failover are a thing. Janica flusters, "No, we're not. One breath of warmth before the cold," because then Elt turns on Ed and tries to buy him. Calls Rothtaylor a backstabbing fox he raised from a child. Offers to double whatever gold she promised. And Ed, bleeding exhausted, just smirks. "She never promised me any gold, so doubling it means nothing. You can't bribe a man who already knows the ending." So Elt stops pretending. Dispose of him quietly. The masked assassin's move. The blades come down and Jix and Janica erupt, spirit power flooding the hall, shielding Ed with their own bodies. "Go," Jix tells him. "Give it everything you've got," and Ed runs. He finds Rothtaylor in tears in the wreckage, and here she is, the golden daughter, the hidden villain of the whole act, pushing him away. "I can't guarantee the 20 gold coins anymore," trying even now to make it transactional because a transaction is the only kind of bond she's ever survived. And Ed grabs her hand and says 4 words that detonate something in her chest. "Did I ask?" He's not leaving her, so she finally tells him everything. The Eastern Mountain Monster Hunt crashed armor prices. Elt was bleeding cash, desperate, and he sent her to Sylvania to steal the grimoire and bail him out. Her countermove: while he's away from headquarters, she collapses his monopoly using 6 merchants she's already bought. Cut the king off from his throne while he's standing in the wrong building. And Ed, because he knows the story cold, finishes the plan for her. Send a decoy carriage, empty, racing toward the Arkan Mountains to pull Elt's pursuit the wrong way. Send the carrier pigeon waiting in her room with one message: "Sell now." And then Rothtaylor disappears for 3 days into a half-built hut in the northern forest. His hut. The cabin you watched him build with his own hands by the campfire. She asks him why he's doing all of this for her, and Ed just says, "I just feel like I should," and walks off. And as she slips out into the dark, Rothtaylor hears this loud, pounding rhythm and thinks it's distant fighting until she realizes it's her own heartbeat, hammering for him. That's the moment, by the way, that's the moment the final boss stops being a final boss. But Ed isn't out yet. Outside in the rain, one of the trader-made twins, Shenny, in charge of the dishes, steps into his path. And Ed, mana nearly gone, almost laughs at how bland the last obstacle feels. Meanwhile, title card, Act 2, Scene 3, Conquest of Chief Maid Alice. Alice is fighting Tanya with every rune in Ophelie's hall, a swordsman and a flawless mage all at once, and she still can't win. Why? Because Tanya is the main character, that's the whole reason. The story bends around her whether she earns it or not. But Ed isn't the main character. Ed has game knowledge and almost nothing left in the tank. So in the rain he reads Shenny like a walkthrough, predicts her stab pattern, predicts the twins' shared ability sharing skill, slips the telekinetic flying blades and counters. Pin Shenny screams her loyalty, she's one of the orphans Alice saved, I wouldn't even be alive if not for her, and throws a last desperate borrowed spell, fire and magenta light. And here's Ed's cold, quiet creed, the thing that makes him who he is. He doesn't know the extra stories, their pain, their reasons, none of his business. He puts her down, and the system rewards him with a new skill, pain endurance. He bleeds, he wins, he levels up off his own suffering. Then he breaks into Rothtaylor's room, finds the pigeon, writes the coded order, sell all of the acquired gear, sends it into the night, and that one little bird is the blade that guts the Golden King. The decoy carriage drags Elt toward the Arkan Mountains, chasing a daughter who isn't there while his entire empire quietly sells out from under him. He came to win and he's already lost, he just doesn't know it yet. And now Ed limps toward the rendezvous, half dead, finally done. And out of the dark, a hooded figure ambushes him, red hair, a glowing blue sword raised to kill. And the narration drops the hammer, this is her, the true secret mastermind. The villain eliminating Ed, the one variable money could never buy. This whole time this is who he was always meant to face at the end. The hooded swordsman in the rain is Rothtaylor Ketchel. And the blade comes down. And she sheathes it. She doesn't kill him, she can't. She stands there with tears running down her face and asks him why he got this hurt for her when he didn't have to. "Let me help you." And then, by a bonfire she's built outside the half-finished hut, the girl who was written to be the final boss of this entire act invites the battered, bleeding gamer to come warm up, together. That's it, that's the turn. She was supposed to be the one who ends him, instead she fell for him. The hidden villain of Act 2 just walked off the board and sat down by his fire. And that closes Part 1, Elt ruined and chasing ghosts. Rothtaylor's heart stolen by a man playing a game only he understands. Janica's power waking up dark, Three people who think they know how this story flows, and one of them, the one bleeding by the bonfire, the one who rewrote all of it from inside a tutorial villain's body. And nobody, not the king, not the daughter, not the hero climbing the tower, nobody still has any idea who he really is. So the most dangerous schemer in the academy just sheathed her blade and fell for him instead of killing him. And that flips the whole game, because now Rothtaylor Ketcheln, the so-called golden daughter, the hidden villain of this entire act, isn't trying to win the war anymore. She's trying to win him. And that is the one fight all of Ed's memorized game knowledge cannot help him win. This is where the story stops being a battle plan and starts being a problem Ed cannot solve with game knowledge, because here's the thing about Ed Rothtaylor. He came into this world knowing every boss, every trap, every line of dialogue. He can read a fight 3 moves ahead. What he cannot read, what nobody handed him a guide for, is a girl deciding she's in love with him. So let's talk about the cabin. Because after the dust settles on the Opheles Hall disaster, Ed does what Ed always does. He goes home to his little log hut in the northern woods and he tries to just survive. His uniform shredded from the fight, so he skips class. He's chopping wood. He's making bricks by hand, building himself a proper brick fireplace, grinding his stonemasonry like the world's most committed survival streamer. The man dismantled a noble conspiracy last night, and today his biggest project is masonry. But the cabin isn't empty anymore, oh no. Remember when this place was just Ed and his fishing rod? Those days are gone. Now there's Janica, pink-haired, sweet, the most talented second year in the entire magic faculty, and she's always around, always close, always finding a reason to be there. And then there's Lucy Merrill, silver hair, purple eyes, the strongest mage of the age. Bored out of her mind by her own power and her contribution to cabin life is sneaking in to nap in whatever patch of sunlight is warmest. She doesn't help, she doesn't even pretend to help. She just claims the best spot in the sun and sleeps like a cat. Hold on to that, by the way, the sleeping. It matters more than you think. And now Rothtaylor's joined the party. She's watching Ed split firewood, watching this boy who helped her for absolutely no reason, who grabbed her hand in the rubble and said, "Did I ask?" When she tried to push him away, and her cold little merchant heart is doing something it has never done before. It's racing, it feels safe, and because Rothtaylor is Rothtaylor, she doesn't process that as, oh, sweet feelings. She processes it as a competition. She looks at Janica. She looks at Ed and she vows out loud to herself that she's going to win him over within 3 days. And then the Manhwa pulls up a little status card on her, the kind it usually saves for stats. Rothtaylor Ketcheln. Number of boyfriends, 0. The general of an economic war, 0 boyfriends. The girl can topple a merchant empire, but she has never once held a boy's hand and meant it. She tries to play it smart, too. As compensation for those 20 gold coins she still owes him, she offers Ed discounted magic engineering equipment, but only if he comes to the Merchant Association in person, every 3 days. Yeah, that's not a discount. That's a scheduled date disguised as a supply run. The most powerful merchant in the academy is buying recurring time with a boy at cost. And Ed takes the deal because Ed wants the equipment. The man is so locked into survival mode that he looks at 3 girls orbiting his cabin and sees a logistics network. But here's the thing, this soft little cabin life, it's the calm before the story turns and bites. Because while Ed is laying bricks, the people who pull the strings of this world are starting to notice him, and that's a problem. Ed's entire survival strategy depends on one rule: stay in extra, stay invisible, be the nobody in the background while the heroes do hero things. And invisibility is exactly what he's about to lose. It starts small. Ed asks Janica to teach him how to contract a spirit, not for combat, mind you, for warmth, for cooking. The man wants a portable heater. So Janica fusses and blushes her way through the lesson, and Ed reaches out and he bonds with a low-rank fire spirit. A tiny glowing orange fire cat that flickers to life in his palm and goes, yeah, its name is Mug. And Ed's first thought, the very first thing this transmigrated tactician thinks when he summons a creature of living flame: a portable heater. Confirmed. He didn't summon a war beast. He summoned a space heater that purrs, and honestly, respect. The system rewards him 2 spirit connection unlocks, and he burns an advanced crafting slot to pick up magic engineering, which is going to matter a lot very soon. Now meet the wrench. There's an assistant professor at the academy, dark hair, glasses, sharp eyes, and she has been chewing on the Opheles Hall takeover ever since it happened. Something about it doesn't sit right. The official story is that the merchant Willain led the revolt and took the fall. But this professor can feel it. There's a hand behind the curtain, a hidden mastermind. Somebody engineered that whole night, somebody who slipped out before anyone could name them. And she is not going to let it go. So one night after work, when it's late and it's dark, she goes out to check the traps around the academy grounds. Alone, muttering to herself that there has to be someone behind all of it, and in the dark she freezes. There's a silhouette, a figure, and the narration starts to coil tight. My feeling wasn't wrong, the hidden mastermind behind the Opheles Hall takeover was. And the moon comes out and the light hits a fur-collared coat with red lining and a glowing blue eye, and she names him. Out loud. Ed Rothtaylor, the extra, the useless reject who got kicked out of Ophely's hall, the nobody, she cracked it, she found him. The one person in this entire world who was never supposed to matter, she just dragged him into the spotlight he spent the whole series running from. So that's it, right? Game over, Ed's exposed, the conspiracy unravels. Except no, because watch who's been sleeping in the sun this whole time. Lucy Merrill, the lazy witch who naps in the cabin, who complains the food is bland, who never lifts a finger. She has not been a bystander, not once. She has been awake the entire time. She is Ed's accomplice, his secret. And when this poor professor finally says the name out loud, finally solves the mystery of her life, Lucy steps out of the dark, asks her flatly, "Who are you?" and detonates a wall of purple dark magic that drops her on the spot. Out cold, the strongest mage of the age, who couldn't be bothered to season a stew, just one-shots the one investigator clever enough to find Ed. And when she comes to, the professor sees Ed carrying the unconscious figure and recognizes her, Lucy, and just screams, "What the hell is all of this?" Because nothing about this makes sense. The useless extra has the most powerful mage in the world running cover for him, and nobody knows why. And while all of that is unspooling in the dark, the real powers of this world are starting to move their pieces. Up in the Academy's high rooms over tea and butlers, we meet Phonia, the princess, platinum-haired, sharp, white-dressed, and quietly running calculations on everyone around her. And the topic on the table is the one object this whole act has been circling, the sage-sealed grimoire. The curse book the story always said would summon a storm to devour the Academy. Rothtaylor comes to the princess with information, and she drops a name that changes the temperature of the entire room. Crepin Rothtaylor, patriarch of the ducal house Rothtaylor. And here's why that name lands like a stone. Crepin is an Act 4 boss, a failed swordsman of Sylvania, and right now at this point in the timeline so monstrously strong there is no way to suppress him. He's not supposed to be here yet. He's pages and pages away in the original story. And Rothtaylor reveals he's been pulling strings to get the grimoire, having her own father, Elt Ketcheln of the Elt Merchantry, buy it up so it can be resold to House Rothtaylor. She even drapes it in sweetness, saying she stepped in partly because her poor senior Ed might get hurt. And the princess listens to all of it, and she makes her decision with a chill that should worry you. Then I'll have no choice but to use him, deceive and exploit. She means Ed. The princess of the kingdom just looked at our heater summoning extra and decided he's a tool to be used and thrown away. And Rothtaylor, who a minute ago was scheming right alongside her, actually flinches and goes, "Who's exploiting?" Even the schemer didn't expect the princess to be that cold. But here's the thing that should be making your skin crawl. Crepin Rothtaylor is here, early, an Act 4 boss walking into the middle of Act 2. And if you've been paying attention, you know what that means. The story is bending hard. Remember when Ed's whole survival plan was to nudge the distorted plot back onto its rails and quietly disappear? That plan is dead. The rails are gone. The biggest piece on the board just showed up half a game ahead of schedule. And Ed is the gravity that's pulling everything off course. And then Ed pays for it. Literally collapses, because the man has been running himself into the ground, cutting sleep, grinding magic and spirit craft for months, forcing knowledge into his skull by brute repetition. His mana gets, in Lucy's words, horribly distorted from all that overtraining, and his body just gives out. He passes out cold, and who's been pouring green restorative magic over him to keep him alive? Lucy. Bored out of her mind, of course. Dozing off mid-heal, but it's her. And when Ed wakes up and learns the truth, it's not "you slept a day." It's worse. He slept for 10 days, an entire chunk of the timeline gone while he was unconscious, and a dozen plot-critical things moved without him. Which brings us to the room where it actually gets decided. The sage-sealed grimoire, the book everyone's been killing over, and the way it changes hands isn't a war, it's an auction. A sealed bid auction held right then and there. Everyone writes their number. Highest bid takes the book. Clean, quiet, civilized, the most dangerous object in the act, sold like a painting. And the princess Phonia sits across from the noble face of House Rothtaylor, Crepin, and the narration paints him exactly the way the world sees him. Noble, dignified, compassionate, wise, and then it tells you what Phonia sees because her eyes cut through the mask. Beneath all of it, this man is evil, plainly, completely evil, and she knows it. That's her gift, by the way. Keep it in your pocket because it pays off later. The princess can look at anyone and read exactly who they are underneath. The bids go in, the official reads the result. Bidder Crepin Rothtaylor, 8,500 Flen gold coins. He wins. The Act 4 monster walks away with the cursed grimoire, and the only question burning in the princess's mind is the right one. Why would a man that powerful come all the way to a school in person just for a book? It can't be about money, so what does he actually want it for? But here's the twist, and it's so perfectly, ruthlessly Rothtaylor. Remember how she told the princess they were allies? How their noble goal was to keep the grimoire out of the evil duke's hands, tying it all back to how Ed fought the darkness of House Rothtaylor to the very end. Yeah, that was a sales pitch, because Rothtaylor's real plan the whole time was to sell the grimoire to Duke Crepin. She bought it for around 4,400. He paid 8,500. Run the math, she pockets the profit and smiles. Saying she wouldn't sell it back to Crepin, the story tells us flat out, was just a merchant's lie. The girl played the princess, played the duke, and walked away with the coins. In the end, Rothtaylor won. She always intended to. And the last hope, the one wild card nobody can price or buy or predict, gets pinned on a single name: Ed Rothtaylor. Meanwhile, back at the actual cabin, far from all that gold and intrigue, Ed is reeling from the fact that he lost 10 days of his life. In being Ed, the deepest, most existential crisis in his soul is not the auction. It's not the princess plotting to exploit him. It's that all the meat he caught and stored before he passed out is by now completely spoiled. The fate of the grimoire hangs in the balance, and the man is mourning a freezer full of ruined venison. Mug the fire cat just sort of shrugs. 10 days out, that reaction's fair, and Ed lands where he always lands. Everything will somehow work out. But it won't just work out. Not this time. Because somewhere behind all the tea and the auctions and the cabin chores, the true monster of this act has been moving in the dark, and it isn't Crepin, and it isn't Rothtaylor, and it isn't the princess. It's fall now, back at the academy. The leaves are turning, and Ed's, the man who plans everything, has a brand new problem he absolutely did not plan for. Two girls keep showing up at his cabin. At night, separately, each one thinking she's the only one. First it's Janica, sweet, flustered, strawberry-haired Janica Failover. She lingers in his cabin after dark, and Ed, exhausted, running on 5 hours of sleep, fever creeping back in, snaps to attention and goes, "What are you trying to do?" Because in his head, every soft moment is a trap waiting to swallow the plot. But Janica isn't scheming. Here's the thing about her: she remembers what it was like to be at her lowest, and the thing that helped her most back then wasn't somebody rushing in to fix it. It was somebody quietly staying, just sitting beside her. So that's exactly what she does for Ed. She looks at this worn-out boy who never lets anybody carry anything, and she says, "You've had a hard time, haven't you? Great job, Ed." And she just watches over him while he rests. She falls asleep on him, little ZZZ. And Ed, this cold, calculating gamer who treats every emotion like a variable, Ed actually cracks. A real smile, a real laugh. PFFT, haha. For 1 second he's not playing the game, he's just a tired kid who got told he did a good job. And then it's morning and it's straight back to the grind. Let's talk about the grind because it matters for what's coming. Ed's been hammering one skill: magic engineering, advanced crafting, the kind of skill that doesn't just give you gadgets, it juices your core stats and bleeds into everything else. Remember Mug, the little fire cat, his portable heater? That bond unlocked this whole path. But Ed hits a wall. Self-study alone has a ceiling. You can only teach yourself so far before you need real materials. Rare materials, the kind you cannot buy at a corner shop. Lucky for him, he knows somebody who can get anything from the other side of the world. Cut to the forest, and there she is. Red hood, red hair, green eyes, Rothtaylor Ketcheln waiting for him. And listen to how they greet each other now. "I'm relieved you're better, I was so worried. I'm glad you're healthy too." There's a softness there. That rain-soaked confession changed something, but Rothtaylor is still Rothtaylor, and she didn't walk into the woods just to say hi. She came to recruit him. She paints him a picture. Imagine waking up every morning and walking one wall over to the Outplaying Trading Company. Imagine you, Ed, as a co-executive, with shares, with a seat at the table. She's offering him the merchant world on a silver platter. And she preempts every objection before he can even open his mouth. You're thinking, what's wrong with this girl? You're thinking, I can't make a decision based on a girl's fleeting emotions. You want to keep it professional. She lays out his own defenses and knocks them down, one by one. And here's what's underneath it. The narration pulls the curtain back on Rothtaylor, and it's not pretty. She runs on fear, a constant low, humming dread. She's watched great merchants, titans fall and lose everything, and somewhere deep down she's terrified that one day that's going to be her. So she clutches, she acquires, she recruits. She privately admits that the whole timid, vulnerable, "I was so worried about you" act as a tactic. It makes the target waver. But she thinks it wasn't completely a lie. In that little crack of honesty is the whole tragedy of her right there. Then she goes for the close, the soft ultimatum. "I can wait until you graduate, but you don't really have a choice, right?" And Ed disarms her completely. He doesn't argue, he just holds up a favor, a free pass. "I might use this soon," he says, and he accepts, but on his terms, with a marker he can cash whenever he wants. Rothtaylor walks off absolutely flustered, thinking, I was going to say that to him at the end. Seeing him pull that messed up my whole plan. She came to recruit him and left the one off balance. And then the collision. Rothtaylor, leaving the cabin, nearly walks straight into Janica. Both of them freeze, both gasp, both narrow their eyes. "Why did you come out of there, Janica? Why did you come from the river?" And in one horrible synchronized instant they both realize we were each secretly visiting Ed. The fox and the spirit summoner busted. The harem is officially a battlefield now, and Ed has no idea. But here's the thing, while all this sweet romance chaos is unfolding, the real monster of this act has been moving in the shadows the entire time. And now the story drops the bomb. Professor Glast, remember him? The skeptical professor, dark hair, glasses, the colleague who got pitched the whole Ed is the secret mastermind theory and rolled his eyes. Professor Glast is the final boss of Act 2. Not a bandit lord, not Rothtaylor's evil father, not even Crepin, the duke who just won the grimoire at auction for 8,500 gold. It's the professor, the quiet one, and here's why. Glast is broken. His whole life he's been obsessed with one idea, proven talent, because of his daughter. A daughter who once swore she would bring honor to her father's name and then died young. That grief rotted into something monstrous, and in his desperation Glast stole the sage-sealed grimoire, the one everybody's been scheming over for weeks, the one Crepin paid a fortune for, the one Rothtaylor and the princess fought to keep out of evil hands. And the grimoire is not what anyone thought it was. It's called the Connection Formula. It's a book that changes the grimoire's owner, that can move a soul in essence from one vessel into another, and Glast's plan, he's going to inject Sylvania's spirit into the body of a living girl. A first-year named Ayla born with rare aspectual magic. He's going to use a child as a vessel. The narration calls it exactly what it is, a madman's narrative. And that is the spark. The Act 2 finale ignites, the story throws up the splash card. Act 2, final scene, the Glast Conquest War, the finale starts now. And how does it open? With Ed in a cage, bound, exhausted, going ha. Beside him is Ayla, the kidnapped girl, and she's furious. Aren't you being way too mean? We were both kidnapped. And Ed just deadpans it. I got kidnapped too. But hold on, because the story rewinds 3 days ago and shows you the part that changes everything. Ed got kidnapped on purpose. This is so Ed. 3 days back he's in his cabin fiddling with his gadgets and he's annoyed that he finished his entire 10-day to-do list but never got to grind up his magic engineering stat before the war kicks off. And then he remembers something. The Glast Conquest War has a vault, a treasure trove of magic engineering blueprints, over a dozen of them including 2 legendary grade items, recipes you cannot get anywhere else in the game. So Ed runs the math like the gamer he is. He's going to shadow the original protagonist, Taylor, let the hero clear the 5 battle phases of the war, save Ayla, and Ed sweeps up all the leftover loot in his wake. And the cleanest way into the dungeon? Don't fight your way in. Let the villain carry you in. Get kidnapped and let Glast do the heavy lifting. There's one cost though, and it scratches at him. To set it up, he lied to Janica. He told her he lost something down in the underground waterway just so she'd come search it with him. And what actually gets under his skin is how fast she said yes, how worried she looked, how eagerly she agreed to go crawling through a sewer for him, no questions asked. Back at the cabin, she's standing there with a ladle going, Ed's running a little late, Tilda. Completely in the dark about what she just walked into. So Ed and a short red-caped girl burst into Glast's office. "Why are you here?" Purple magic erupts, a masked attacker, eyes glowing, a girl screaming, and Glast, the dark-haired, bespectacled villain, pins Ed in his magic and asks the obvious question. Why would you force this? Why walk into my hands? And Ed just tells him the truth, plain as day. He let himself be taken, because he reasoned coldly, correctly, that Glast has no reason to silence him. Ed's not a threat to be eliminated, he's just an inconvenience to be caged. So caging him is exactly where Ed wanted to be. Glast actually marvels at him. Ed Rothtaylor, he says, top of the class, academically untouchable, and somehow living rough out in the wilderness at the same time. It's like he lives 48 hours in a single day. In that sight, a kid burning himself down to the wick to chase something, it reminds Glast of that memory again. His daughter, the one who promised to make him proud. For one moment the final boss looks at Ed and sees a ghost. Now Ed's inside, and the dungeon goes deeper. There's a book down here, let me tell you about this book because it pays off in a second. It's a magic travelogue written by the late Archmage Glocht, and in it this old, powerful mage confesses he never felt he deserved his own title. He pours his whole heart out honoring his dead, beautiful master Sylvania, and the final dedication, the very last line of the entire book, is just one word, a name, to you, who has become the full stop of my life. I dedicate the last sentence of this book, Lucy. Hold on to that name because Glocht was Lucy's master, and he's dead. We are going to come back to that, and when we do, it changes everything. Meanwhile, up at the surface, Rothtaylor is closing the deal of the war. She moves the grimoire to Crepin one final time for 12,000 coins, and remember the princess, remember the promise that Ed would keep it out of the Duke's hands. 12,000 coins is enough money to make a lie worth telling. The deal closes, and what does Rothtaylor actually get out of it? An all-access pass to Ed. Everything she does, every coin she moves, it all bends back toward him. But Ed isn't up there with the money, he's down in the underground waterway, in a prison, and he is not alone. There's a girl locked in a cell, dark hair, green eyes, and she hates Ed. The second she sees him she's screaming. She worships Taylor, the real hero, and she demands to know why this guy is here ruining everything. Ed shushes her. Be quiet, he warns, or the monster caged down here in the waterway wakes up. And he notes almost to himself that by now Glass should already have the grimoire. The pieces are landing exactly where he placed them. His little spirit Mug finally tracks him down. Mug, good job finding me here, frees a blind captive researcher along the way, and Ed's operation is nearly clean. Sweep the replica recipes, no one to fight, no one to get rid of. Perfect. So he throws the cell keys to the angry girl. Her legs gave out, she can't even stand, but he tells her to run anyway. Yes or no? And she's fuming at him. This idiot, why did he do something I didn't even ask for? Because even his kindness comes out sideways. And then the story shows you a card, and the card tells you who this girl really is. Lucy the Slothful, tied to bad ending 27. This is her, the in scenario Lucy. The one who, if you mishandle her, if you do the wrong thing, say the wrong word, push her down the wrong path, becomes the one enemy in this entire game that you cannot beat. Not hard to beat. Not needs a strategy. Unbeatable, the bad ending. The wall the developers built that no player ever climbs. And Ed knows it. He sits there and he thinks, by now I can solve almost any problem with my stats. Almost anything, almost anyone, but not her. This is the one truly unbeatable foe in the world. And he just unlocked her cage. He just threw her the keys and told her to walk free. The single most dangerous thing in this entire story is loose now, and she's standing on Ed's side. So what happens when the unbeatable enemy owes you one? We're about to find out. Because here's what you have to understand about how Ed handles Lucy Merrill. She is the single strongest mage of this entire era, not one of the strongest. The strongest, there is no one on the continent who can stand against her at full power. And in the original story Ed knows she's the trigger for the worst outcome in the whole game, bad ending 27. Lucy the Slothful, the wipe. The fight you cannot win no matter how strong you are. Because she was never meant to be fought, she was meant to be kept happy, kept entertained, kept bored. So Ed's strategy for the most powerful being in the world, babysitting, I'm not kidding. He keeps Lucy parked right next to him, hand-feeding her jerky, letting her nap on his shoulder, taking her mob hunting through the underground waterway so she doesn't get bored enough to wander off and do something catastrophic. She complains the whole time. Give me jerky. I just want to find a spot to nap. And Ed just agrees. Yes, Lucy. Of course, Lucy. Stay right here, Lucy. Meanwhile, he's clearing the dungeon in reverse, hunting monsters with his green fire, ignition, getting caught in those experience point explosions, watching his elemental magic and his mana resonance climb with every kill. Remember, the green mana is his signature, that grassy smell. It's not healing, it never was, but it lights up beautifully in the dark, and he's getting good, scary good. And his actual plan is elegant, because Ed doesn't want to be the hero, he has a hero. The real protagonist of this whole story is a kid named Taylor, dark hair, red eyes, born with the way of the Sword Saint, the one who's supposed to chase down the final boss. So Ed's whole move is, stay invisible, sweep up all the legendary magic engineering blueprints, and shove the real hero forward to do the boss fight. He finds Taylor lost in the fire traps. His party despairing, and he just says it, go catch Glass, Taylor, Ayla's waiting. And he steps back into the shadows, wreathed in blue mana, and goes, it's time for my side to handle the variables. But here's the thing, a variable just walked onto the board that was never supposed to be here. The Golden King, Ketcheln. In the original story, this guy was the mid-boss of the whole episode and he was crushed. Thoroughly. Gone. But because Ed knocked the timeline sideways because events shifted, Elt fell from power in a different way at a different time and he slipped the net. He escaped, and now he's on the island with a small army of the best mercenaries money can buy, plotting a counterattack, and his target, Rothtaylor. Remember Rothtaylor, the red-haired merchant who sheathed her sword in the rain back in part 1 and fell for Ed instead of killing him? Well, the Golden King Elt isn't just some rival to her, he's the man who raised her. He taught her document management. He taught her that trademark merchant smile she uses to disarm everyone. He was a father to her, and he's the man who murdered her real parents to build his own golden empire. He raised the orphan he made. So when Elt corners Rothtaylor in the waterway, this is not a business dispute. This is the whole rotten foundation of her life, walking up to finish the job. And cold as ice, he orders his mercenaries kill everyone except Rothtaylor. He still wants her alive. Now Rothtaylor is sharp. She saw this coming. She hired the continent's best mercenaries of her own as a countertrap because she knew Elt would never come alone. But Elt has an answer for that too, a legendary magic engineering item called Belarus's Prejudice. A single-use sheet, absurdly expensive, that suppresses all mana in the area for 10 full minutes. And Ed and Rothtaylor, they're an all-mage party. If that thing fully activates, they don't just lose the fight. They lose the ability to fight, they're helpless. And Ed looks at Elt and feels nothing. No hatred. He knows the script. He knows that in the original, Rothtaylor is the one who backstabs Elt in the end. He knows this man is an absolute villain, but Ed isn't here for revenge. He's here because, in his own words, this is my story and these are the variables he created, and he is not going to give in. So he does the only thing that makes sense. He wakes up Lucy. He nudges the bored, napping, all-powerful witch and points her at the problem. And Lucy the slothful opens those purple eyes and goes to work. And here's the terrifying part, she doesn't even use spells. Not at first. She just compresses her mana into raw physical violence and walks through Elt's veteran mercenaries like they're made of paper. These are seasoned killers, men who have survived 100 battles, and they don't even recognize what she is. They just get erased, and then she turns to Elt himself. So you're the leader, huh? Then I guess I just have to take you down. And this right here, this is the moment Ed has been terrified of since the beginning. Because do you remember why Lucy is bad? Ending 27. Lucy had a master. Remember the travelogue down in the dungeon, the one dedicated to Lucy, the full stop of a dying man's life? That was him, the Archmage Glocked. Legendary, humble, kind. He raised her, he loved her, and he died. And in the original story, the cornered villain offers Lucy a deal. I will use my magic to resurrect your dead master. Bring Glocked back. And the grief in her is so bottomless that she takes it. She turns on everyone. And she annihilates the entire party. That's the ending. That's the wipe. The strongest mage in the world, weaponized by one single offer to undo the worst day of her life. And right now, Glass Towers are humming with the kind of aspectual magic that could actually make resurrection possible. The pieces are all on the board, one offer, that's all it would take. So before Lucy lands the killing blow, Ed stops her. And he doesn't beg and he doesn't explain, he just recites words, quiet ones. He tells her, stop unless you really think it's okay to kill someone. Don't stain your hands, stay a proper student. And Lucy freezes, because those aren't Ed's words, those are Glock's words, word for word, the exact teaching her dead master gave her in a humble little cabin years ago. Do not kill anyone, do not stain your hands with blood. And she stares at the strange boy who somehow knows the private gospel of a man who's been dead for years, and something in her realizes, the one Glocked was always worried about is not someone who's going to die today. And Lucy makes her choice. No. That's it, that's the whole thing. Bad ending 27, the unwinnable wipe, the worst outcome in the entire game does not happen, it just doesn't, because a transmigrated gamer memorized a dead man's kindness and handed it back to her at the exact right second. Elt is subdued, handed over to the trading company. All 57 of Rothtaylor's people get on the boats and retreat without a single casualty. Catastrophe averted. And later, among the silent magic towers, Lucy actually opens up to him. She tells him she used to cry over losing her grandpa, that she stopped because too much time has passed and dwelling on it is foolish. And she works it out for herself out loud that reviving Glock would only force him to leave all over again, that it would insult a man who already made peace with death and gave his whole life to magic, so she rejects it completely. Yeah, she says. I knew it from the beginning. And Ed, still nervous, still half convinced this could be a passing mood that turns terrible, asks if she's really okay. And Lucy doesn't answer with words, she just says quietly, lend me your shoulder. And she leans on him, the most powerful being in the world, accepting that the dead are dead and you cover your wounds with what you have left. Meanwhile, the real boss fight is finally happening. Taylor's sword in hand, refusing to quit even if it costs him the rest of his life, drives into the heart of Glass' aspectual magic golem where Ayla is trapped and screaming. Glass throws everything at him. Time reversal, literally rewinding the clock, unfreezing the frozen. And Taylor just presses on. Janik as they're backing him up, dodge Taylor, and then ice spear now. And Taylor lands the decisive blow. The golem detonates in a massive fireball and Ayla is free. But Glass, the final boss of the entire second act, he's not some cackling monster on the floor. He's a broken man bleeding out, whispering a name. I miss you, Muri, a lost daughter. That's what all of this was for. The whole mad scheme, the kidnappings, the resurrection magic, it was a grieving father trying to claw one person back from death. And here's the turn that gets me. Because the students Glass kidnapped Dorothy, the top alchemy talent, Claire, the assistant professor everyone wrote off as untalented, they don't curse him. They defend him. Because the dirty secret of Professor Glass is that for all his recklessness, all his life he had been quietly finding the forgotten kids, the ones every other teacher dismissed, and nurturing them into something brilliant. As if to prove over and over that his lost Muri was someone valuable too. He couldn't save himself, but he stayed in the hearts of everyone he raised. And with his last breath he turns to Ed, and he says, I saw you in the spirit library. I saw you make your flashy little exit, sweeping up every legendary crafting formula in the place. And he tells him there was no point, because those formulas already belong to you, Ed, and then he presses something into Ed's hand. A key. secret safe hidden beneath a desk. Handle it, Glass says when the Academy's investigation begins. And then the final boss of Act 2 closes his eyes, peaceful like he's just falling asleep. And Ed couldn't see Lucy's face in that moment. And the three of them, Ed, Rothtaylor, Janica, just stand there in the quiet, watching over the body of the man who, in his own broken way, took care of the children no one else wanted. And then the bill comes due the way it always does for Ed. A senior dean hauls him in for questioning, and he lays out Ed's whole resume of suspicious incidents, the Glaskin affair, the Opheles Hall occupation, and now the theft of the sage-sealed grimoire, and he says it flat out. You act like you know nothing, but you know a lot. And Ed does what Ed always does. He sticks to his cover, kidnapped by Glass, escaped, ran into Taylor's group. Janica and Rothtaylor came to help, played dumb, played innocent, gave them nothing. And it works, because as far as the Academy can tell, Ed is a poor, friendless student who got dragged into a catastrophe through the school's own negligence, so the dean, feeling guilty, decides to reward him. He tells Ed he can move into the Academy dormitories, end the lonely wandering, end the camping, get a real bed under a real roof. You deserve it. And listen, for a guy whose entire personality this whole season has been about survival, about cutting his sleep to 5 hours, about a fluffy mattress being a luxury and a fire spirit being a portable heater, this lands different. Ed finally gets a home, a real one. He reunites with Janica, who's fretting that she always makes him worry, and he gently lies that he wasn't hurt at all, just to comfort her, and she lights up like the sun when she hears he's moving into the dorm. Episode 2 wraps up clean, every variable patched, every disaster dodged, and Ed stands there looking at his reinforced little forest hut with this strange, mixed feeling, realizing the camping life is over. He's at the hut, the chaos is finally, blessedly, behind him. He gets a real home for the first time since he fell into this world. And then someone appears at his door. Platinum hair, white dress, standing completely alone in the dark outside his cabin. It's Phonia. Now remember Phonia, the third princess, the one we met at the tea table, the one with the insight skill, the one ability that lets her read the true intentions of anyone she looks at, peel back every mask, see exactly who a person really is. Remember when she stared across that auction table at Duke Crepin and saw straight through his noble face to the evil underneath? She can do that to anyone except one person. There is exactly one human being in this entire world whose heart her insight cannot crack open, whose intentions stay a complete, infuriating blank. And he just got assigned a dormitory, and she just showed up at his door, alone. Because in part 3, the princess who cannot read him is going to get a lot closer than this. And to survive what's coming, the student council war, the third princess, the strongest mage now framed as the next final boss, Ed Rothtaylor is about to attempt the single most dangerous thing he has done in this entire story. He's going to fake his own death. But that is part 3. So there she is. Phonia, platinum hair, white dress, standing alone in the snow at the door of a forest hut that officially no princess should know exists. And Ed freezes. Because of everyone in this entire academy, Phonia is the one person whose skill is literally called insight. She reads people, she reads situations. And right now she's reading the exact spot where a man who claims to be a poor, friendless scholarship student has built himself a whole secret life. But here's the thing you have to hold on to, because this next stretch of the story is going to play games with your head. Ed is about to set up the biggest gamble of his life. He knows the third act is coming. He knows what's supposed to happen to Lucy. And quietly behind everything you're about to watch, the chores, the snow, the cozy little winter scenes, Ed is laying the groundwork to fake his own death. Keep that in your back pocket, we'll get there, and when we do, it's going to be the wildest thing this story has ever pulled. But first, the dust settles. Episode 2 is over, Glass is dead, and the Academy for once decides to be kind to Ed Rothtaylor. Remember, this is the kid who's been living in a tent in the woods like some feral survivalist. Well, the dean looks at him, the poor wronged student who got kidnapped, escaped, and helped save everyone, and basically goes, "You've suffered enough, you deserve a real bed." He offers Ed a dorm, a room in Dex Hall, the lonely camping life over. Except Ed does something nobody expects. He trades it away. He gives up the dorm privileges for tuition privileges instead, because the hut in the forest, that's not poverty anymore, that's a base of operations, that's his workshop, his storage, his hideout. He is not leaving that for a bunk bed. And while Ed's recalculating, we get inside Lucy's head, and it is not pretty. Lucy Merrill, the strongest mage in this whole story, the silver-haired witch in the pointed hat, is having nightmares. She dreams of her childhood, of visiting her grandfather's cabin, her mentor, the legendary archmage who raised her, and then the dream curdles. Her grandfather becomes a corpse, a screaming skull accusing her, "Why didn't you save me? You had the chance, why did you look away?" She wakes up shaking, and she does this thing. She uses high-level spatial magic, just teleports, follows a pull she can't even explain, and she ends up at Ed's hut. And the second she sees him alive, breathing, fine, she feels relief. Pure, inexplicable relief. She doesn't even understand it herself. This terrifyingly powerful girl just needs to know that this one ordinary boy is okay. And then comes one of my favorite quiet beats in the whole season. Lucy tells Ed she loved it. The camp, the time they spent out here in the woods, and she's sad it's ending. And out of nowhere, this aloof, sleepy, godlike mage, she grabs him, just embraces him. Lucy, and she makes him promise if he moves into Deck's hall he has to call her. He has to, hold on to that too. Because the whole tragedy of this third act is that the strongest person in the world is, underneath it all, just a kid who's terrified of being left behind again. Okay, recess, winter break, and Ed turns into a machine. He's offered a work-study deal, handle academic tasks, get a tuition discount, assisting assistant professor Claire. Now Claire is a piece of work. Blonde, glasses, an assistant professor at a freakishly young age, and she has zero dignity. She's constantly apologizing, constantly flustered. She and her staff member Annie's are drowning, because all the work the late Glass was juggling just got dumped on them. So Ed steps in. And what happens next is one of the smartest moves Ed makes all season. He becomes Claire's teaching assistant, and because Claire is well-liked and respected, that respect rubs off. Suddenly the academy workers, the staff, the other students, they all start speaking well of Ed Rothtaylor. The crude tent kid who used to brag about his mono resonance, gone. Now he's the second year who earned the nod of every worker in the academy. He gets called the greatest teaching assistant the place has ever had. Ed didn't just clear his name, he laundered his entire reputation, and he did it by being genuinely, relentlessly useful. But while Ed is winning everyone over by being decent, the schemers come out. Because in a story like this, sincerity is a weapon nobody knows how to block. And the first one who tries to play him is Annie's. Annie's second year, and she treats human relationships like a game of switching masks. She's a survivor, she'll use any means. Her role model, Lortel, and Lortel's a junior, but Annie's looks up to her anyway. And Annie's has a history with Ed that he hasn't told you about yet. Because here's the reveal, Annie's used to be the chief maid of the Rothtaylor household. Dark bob made headband, gold eyes. She served young Master Ed back when he was noble. She knows him from before. So Annie starts digging. She profiles him like a target. She knows his noble upbringing, baptized at 5, etiquette lessons at 8, never knew money troubles as a child. And she builds a strategy. She manufactures an affinity point. She presents herself as a fellow sufferer, someone who clawed through a brutal academy life just like she imagines he did. She makes herself look competent on the surface but secretly fragile underneath. Why? To trigger his instinct to protect her. It's a con. She even probes the wound directly. You were excommunicated from your family, right? Watching his face for the crack. And Ed just laughs it off. Ahaha, thanks, composed, warm. He spots a stone on the path that might trip a student, tells Annie's to sit and rest, and goes off to clear it himself because he doesn't want anyone slipping in the snow. And Annie sits there watching him, and her plan is working perfectly, and she thinks, this is it. This is how he makes women fall for him, almost all according to plan. Except the con only works if it's an act, and Ed isn't acting. He really does clear the stone, he really is that considerate. And slowly Annie's, the master manipulator who scripted this whole thing, starts to realize she can't find the seam. There's no performance to expose because there's nothing underneath but the real thing. By the time she's reporting back to Claire, she's saying it out loud. Everyone manipulates, everyone wears a mask. And yet Ed Rothtaylor was different. And then it hits her. She's not running the game anymore, she's catching real feelings, and she panics. This is trouble. The schemer got disarmed by the one thing she had no defense against, somebody who actually meant it. Now hold that, because a second schemer is rolling up to the academy, and this one's family. This is Tanya Rothtaylor, Ed's little sister. Blonde ringlet curls, purple ribbon, purple eyes, gothic black dress, arms crossed, permanently unimpressed. And Ed knows exactly who she is because he knows the story. Tanya isn't some background extra. In the original, Tanya is a villainess, a political genius, raised in the duchy, sharp as a blade. She arrives at the academy early before the semester even starts to lock down her position before anyone else can move. And her magic. Tanya's power is called cause and effect. She reads the threads. She sees how things will play out. She is built to scheme. Remember that power, cause and effect. It is going to come back and break your heart. And there's a private wound here. Tanya reads a letter from her father, the Duke, and she's so moved just to hear from him. I'll satisfy your expectations, father. This girl is desperate to be worthy, and the academy she's walked into is already poisoned against her brother. At a tea gathering, the gossip pours in. Ed's full of bluffs, crude, no elegance, acted like an archmage over a flicker of mono resonance. And Tanya's eye glints. Keep talking. How interesting. She's coming for him. So picture the setup. The cold, calculating, villainous sister arriving expecting to find a contemptible failure of a brother she can use or discard. She's braced for disdain. She's braced for the same cruelty she remembers, and instead, Ed is kind to her. She finally faces him. It's been a while, brother. Privately thinking the whole situation is hopeless, and Ed just says her name, calm and warm, tells her not to worry. has one of his allies pull out a chair for her, gives her a warm drink, and then he says the thing that breaks her completely. He tells her humbly that he was pathetic when he lived at the estate, that he won't be much help to her, but that he knows how hard she always works. He sees her. The brother, who's supposed to despise her, looks at this scheming little villainess and tells her he knows she tries her best. And Tanya is stunned, because she's watching the people around Ed, Janica, his allies, and they genuinely believe in him. They follow this unsophisticated, inelegant brother, and she expected contempt and got carefulness, and it throws her so hard she actually starts begging him to stop. Stop being kind. She doesn't know how to fight that. Two schemers, 2 days, both disarmed by the exact same thing, a guy who refuses to perform because he doesn't have to. But why does Ed have to win Tanya over? Why is she braced for cruelty in the first place? Here's where the story finally shows you the rot under the Rothtaylor name, and it is grim, because there was another heir once, Arwen Rothtaylor, the eldest daughter. And when Arwen died, a new heir took over and everything changed. And the line the story hangs the whole flashback on is this: if you want to see who someone truly is, give them power. And the new heir, it was the original Ed, the one whose body our Ed is living in now, and the original Ed was deranged, self-destructive. There's this flashback and it is disturbing. The old Ed with a knife screaming, "Do it, stab me, ha 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 ha." A young Tanya cowering on the floor among fallen figures. This is the brother Tanya remembers, a cruel, unhinged monster. And it got so bad the family threw him out, a document, the family crest. A single word: excommunicated, Ed Rothtaylor cast into the streets. And that finally is why our Ed is poor. That's why he was living in a tent. The body he woke up in had already burned every bridge it had and been exiled with nothing. He didn't start at zero. He started in a hole the previous owner dug. So when our Ed is gentle with Tanya, it's not just nice, it's repair. He's undoing the worst thing the person he's pretending to be ever did. And Tanya, watching her terrifying nightmare of a brother be soft, it rewrites everything she thought she knew. Burn that into your memory, because in a few minutes this same sister is going to look into the future and see her brother die and decide to let it happen. Meanwhile, the work gets done. Ed grinds through that winter break like nobody's business. The to-do list: workshop plans, storage, expanding the cabin, finishing the scholarship work, raising his magic engineering levels, a bow-type skill, intermediate magic theory, and the big one, a contract with a high-ranking spirit. He picks up mid-rank magic from an engineering book. He blasts through most of his scholarship work on day 1. He trains his spirit resonance and his magic power so hard that one of his little spirit familiars is cheering him on, Master Ed, right before he straight up collapses from exhaustion. Maximum effort every single day. And that spirit contract pays off, because there's a fox-like spirit and a flame bird spirit in the mix, and the flame spirit comes bounding up to Janica. "Nice to meet you, Janica." Sweet pink-braided Janica, kind to a fault, gets a little overwhelmed by this blazing personality, and the spirit worriedly checks, "Are you okay, Janica?" There's a whole tender thread here about who's strong enough to actually hold a high-ranking spirit's mana for the long haul, and the answer keeps circling back to Janica, the top student of the year, even though she'd never put herself forward. Hold on to Janica. The quiet ones always matter most by the end. Lortel's working the back channels the whole time, red-haired merchant, the proxy company president, chasing down the Sage Grimoire purchase certificate, sensing the dangerous magic resonance coming off it, vowing to be more ruthless, to do anything to lock it down for Ed. And then she comes to him with her real ask. When the third act hits, the fight over student council president, Ed should choose her side. It's the main character's decision who wins. And Ed just agrees. "All right, that's not hard, easy," while Lortel smiles that captivating, scheming smile of hers. Now, quick important reminder, because it matters for everything that's coming. Ed's signature is green mana. Green, that smell of fresh-cut grass. Remember that it is not healing magic, no matter what anyone tells you later. It's his element, his fingerprint, the literal scent that clings to his spell work. Lock that in, because very soon there is going to be a moment where a figure wreathed in green mana does something impossible. And people are going to invent a story about who that was. You'll know, you already know whose mana smells like grass. So the cabin fills up. Lucy's asleep on Ed's lap one moment, snoring at his cabin the next. She bosses him around to light the fire for me that way, then notices Annie's flower scent stuck to him from a full day of shoveling snow side by side and gets visibly, adorably jealous. She offers to help him. "If your magic is twisted, I'll release it." She asks him to pat her head by the fire. Quiet, warm, domestic. And Ed knows, he knows the whole time, that in the original story, this exact girl, this Lucy, is framed as the final boss of the third act. He's patting the head of the person the scenario wants him to sacrifice. And there it is. The cruelty Ed has been circling. He weighs it cold and clear, sacrificing Lucy for the scenario. He steels himself for it, and at the same time the story flashes you the truth of what's coming: a witch hat girl awakening in a storm of purple lightning, reciting a prophecy. Sylvania will overcome almost every trial alone, but it will face when it cannot. When Lucy awakens, she becomes a bolt of purple lightning. and there is no one who can match her. That's the abyss at the bottom of this third act. The Annie's thread closes its loop beautifully. Annie's goes to Belle, a worker at Ophelie's hall, and asks her to introduce her to a boy. Belle suggests who else, the incoming third-year young Master Ed. And Annie's admits it, out loud, she's attracted to him. She even considers swapping him out for some other fake boyfriend to keep her relationship game alive, and then decides no, that would be disrespecting him. The manipulator developing a conscience. And Belle gently reframes the whole thing. That confusion Annie's feels, that's a real desire to protect someone. The exact tactic Annie's tried to run on Ed has been run on her by her own heart. Okay, spring creeps in. The winter recess winds down by a quiet campfire, and the briefing for the third-year class assignment exam begins. And this one's different. It's not last year's Northern Forest run. This time, students have to find a relic and place it on something called the altar of substitution. And the proctor laying it out, blonde, freckled glasses, describes a difficulty that is, frankly, absurd. Winged demon monsters. A meat grinder where only the survivors form a class. She actually laughs about it, relishing this scenario where no one makes it to a class. And Ed goes wary because he knows what's underneath the laughter. And then she reveals the trick. The thing that makes this exam a wall nobody clears. Those terrifying monsters, they're not real, they're imaginary, generated by a magic engineering item, a rare rank purple vision disc. The proctor's whole job is just to set up the disc and handle safety, and then she steps back. That purple vision disc is the most important. That's the reason no one passes. An exam fought against monsters conjured straight out of an illusion. A wall built to fail every student who hits it. A disguised princess who already knows too much. A sister rewritten by kindness. A schemer caught in her own trap. And Lucy, the strongest of them all, asleep by Ed's fire, with no idea that the boy patting her head has already started to weigh her life against the story he's trying to survive. The third act is here. And the practical exam is where it all detonates. So picture the format. It's the class assignment exam, the one that decides who even gets to be in a class, and the rules are brutal. Students have to fight past upperclassmen proctors and place a magic stone on an altar that sits on top of a tree stump. The proctors guard that altar like dragons on a hoard. The magic stones they're using are top shelf. Of course, it's Sylvania quality, which means the simulated monsters and the simulated power are no joke. Everybody's puffing their chest out. No matter how good the other guy is, I've got more stamina, all that. And then there's Ed. Ed isn't puffing anything out. Ed walks in half blind. There's this running thing where he literally can't feel magic properly right now, like his senses are dulled, and his teammate is genuinely worried. Ed, you can't even sense mana, are you going to be okay? And Ed just smirks and says 4 words that should sound insane coming from a guy who can't feel magic. I'll guard the altar. Not place the medallion, guard the altar. He's volunteering to be the proctor's problem. He's volunteering to be the bottleneck, because Ed isn't here to pass an exam. Ed is here to read the room. He's stalling. He's buying time to scan every variable in the building, and he flat out admits it to himself. I'm not actually curious about this test. I'm using it as my own vision disc. He's treating the whole exam like reconnaissance. He even clocks the traces of where a magic stone was used. He's 3 moves ahead while everyone else is still warming up. So he gets to the altar and the first proctor steps out. A red-haired woman, cool, confident, the altar's guardian, and she looks at this exhausted, half-blind kid and goes, "Oh, my first guest, all you have to do is place the magic stone on the altar." Easy, cute, condescending, and that's when it starts. A blonde fire proctor opens up on Ed with high-level flame magic. Ignition class, scorch class, the real stuff, and a blue-haired ice proctor backs him up with mid-rank ice, trying to box Ed in fire on one side, frost on the other. Classic pincer. The kind of thing that ends a student's exam in about 4 seconds. And Ed just tilts his head and asks them the question, "You think you'll only be fighting mages?" And then he does the thing nobody at this academy is ready for. He uses fire himself. He doesn't dodge the flames, he shrugs them off. Fire tolerance. He stands in the inferno like it's a warm bath and the proctors lose it. Where did he get that from? Where does a student get fire resistance? And before they can recalibrate, Ed turns their own attacks back on them and floods the field with green mana. That signature green. The grass-scented mana that makes everyone assume he's some kind of healer and is absolutely not a healer. He overwhelms them with it. The ice proctor goes down. And the red-haired guardian, the one who called him my first guest, is forced to choke out 2 words she clearly never expected to say to a student. I've lost. Ed grabs the magic stone and just drops it, shatters it. Done. The proctor concedes the match, and then, dazed, she asks him the only question that matters. "Excuse me, what's your name?" And Ed looks at her, and he gives her a name. Nortondale. Nortondale, write that down. Burn it into your memory, because that is a lie, that is not his name. Ed Rothtaylor just looked a proctor dead in the eye and handed her a fake identity, smooth as anything, and walked away. And right now it plays like a throwaway, a cool guy moment, a guy too mysterious to give his real name, but it is not a throwaway, that alias is a seed. Ed is planting Nortondale in the official record of this academy on purpose. And half of what's coming hangs off this exact moment. He's not being mysterious. He's building a back door. He's establishing a name that can exist when Ed no longer can. Remember, Phonia's at his door. The forged death is loading, and a dead man needs another name to walk around in. This is him buying that name in public in front of witnesses disguised as a flex. So sit with that because it changes how you read everything from here. Every cool move Ed makes from now on is also a rehearsal for a disappearing act. Now the exam keeps rolling and it gets bigger. The team regroups and here's where Tanya enters the fight. Remember Tanya, the so-called villainous sister, the political genius who came in expecting to despise her excommunicated brother and instead got blindsided by him just being kind to her. Well, now they're fighting side by side, and Ed runs the play like a commander. He turns to her and says, "Tanya, go for the main body just like you planned. I'll be the bait." And his classmate is losing her mind because this is the guy who said he wasn't even interested in the exam and now he's coordinating like a veteran. You said you didn't care, make up your mind. A combat faculty senior comes barreling at them, a real monster of a proctor, and just as he's about to land a blow, this strange protective glow flares up and deflects him, a barrier that activates against anyone trying to do harm. That's Ed, quietly, in the background, already protecting his people without announcing it. And while the proctor's reeling, Tanya cuts loose. She summons spirits, a wolf-like ice beast, a serpent dragon, and fights like a seasoned spirit sorcerer, and the proctor just stares in disbelief. And Ed picks up a bow, green mana threading the string, and the proctor gasps because he remembers the reputation. No way, the guy who couldn't even hold the hilt of a sword properly knows how to use a bow. Same impossible reversal as last year, the failure who became dangerous. And here's the quiet character turn underneath all the spectacle. The classmate who spent this whole arc convinced Ed was a thug and a fraud watches Tanya fight, watches Ed lead, and revises her whole opinion out loud. "My thoughts were wrong. I'm seeing you differently, Tanya. Something has definitely changed." That's the season's thesis right there. People change. The story keeps proving it person by person. Now let me pull the camera over to a figure in a hood because the story's been cutting to her this whole time and now we learn who she actually is. The Saintess, and the reveal is gentle and a little heartbreaking. Her name isn't a title, it's Kylie, just Kylie, and the line lands like a stone in water. Who would bother thinking of Kylie as the Saintess? Nobody in Sylvania recognizes her. She came here to be a normal student, to live a normal academy life. To be a person instead of a relic on a holy pedestal. There's this whole tender backstory of a wandering bard who sang at her window when the whole world was asleep, and she walked out of her pure white sheltered life onto a colorful road for the very first time. She just wanted out. She just wanted to be ordinary. But she carries something. A guardian put it in her hand when she was small and told her over and over, "You must keep this with you at all times." A golden ring. And we are going to come back to that ring because it's a name you already know. Because here's the collision. That brown-haired, red-eyed academy girl, the classmate who's been around this whole arc, that's Kylie. That's the Saintess Clarice in hiding, living her ordinary little life. And she has just realized that her secret, the one thing that could blow up her entire normal existence, might be exposed. She's terrified that even a single outsider knows who she really is, so she starts hunting for leaks, and her suspicion lands on one name. One unaccounted-for variable from the exam, a guy who acted all tough yet didn't even get close to the altar. Nortondale. You see what just happened? The fake name Ed planted to protect himself, the back door he built so smoothly, is the exact thread the Saintess pulls. She digs. She says it herself, it wasn't hard to get information on him, and to confirm whether Nortondale is who she thinks he is, she doesn't ask, she attacks. What does she attack with? Glass's golden phoenix ring. Legendary rank magic engineering tool. Phoenix fire. Remember Professor Glass, who died at the end of the last act, the man obsessed with resurrection, the man who built precious items for the people he treasured. Remember he left an anal, a ring crafted for his daughter, and a key. His traces are everywhere in this story. And it turns out this golden ring, the one the disguised Saintess has been ordered to carry at all times, the one her guardian pressed into her hand as a child, is Glass's work. The dead professor's fingerprints are on the weapon that's about to go off. She raises the ring and unleashes golden phoenix fire straight at Ed to burn the truth out of him. To confirm an identity by force, because holy blessings don't take on those baptized by the Telos order, and Ed, who inherited the Rothtaylor name, may very well have been baptized. So her fire might just reveal exactly what he is. The disguise and the test are about to meet in a burst of golden flame. Ed built a mask called Nortondale to disappear behind, and the mask got noticed before he could even use it. And before the storm hits, two threads quietly lock into place. The first is the spirits because it pays off later. Ed talks with an ice fox spirit, wise, teasing, white and blue, and she drops a line that's basically the whole show's philosophy. The worst curse a human can experience is a dull and boring life. She talks about how even Janica needs to live through one winter, to go through the whole process of understanding, before she really grows. And here's the key detail. That spirit is not contracted to Janica. They're just clothes. Ed knows he can't sustain a high-ranking spirit on his own mana for long, and he's quietly doing the math on who else could hold one. The answer he keeps circling is Janica, hold that. And then the story jumps and the air goes cold. The final stage of the third act, and we see her, a girl in a witch's hat, a dark magician, awakening in a storm of purple lightning. She was awakened, and she recites the prophecy. Sylvania will overcome nearly every trial it faces alone, but there is one it cannot, one it will not survive on its own. You know who that hat belongs to. You know who turns into a bolt of purple lightning when she awakens. That's the shadow of Lucy Merrill falling across the whole back half of the season. And Ed, sitting there bloodied and sleepless, makes himself think the unthinkable. He weighs it, sacrificing Lucy for the scenario. He steels himself, if there's one thing I'd like to make sure I do. He's looking down the barrel of the worst choice this story can offer him and trying to be ready for it. That's the trial Sylvania can't beat alone, and it has Lucy's name on it. Now hold that image of Phonia in the doorway because the real trap isn't even built yet. It's 3 days out, and the person building it loves him. Let me show you the letter. Dear respected father. Greetings, father. Sweet, formal, a daughter riding home from school. It's Tanya telling her dad about academy life, her few friends, her dream of becoming the youngest student council president ever. Her worry that Princess Phonia, who the whole empire adores, might run against her. She mentions meeting Rothtaylor, that red-haired merchant who gives off the feeling of being a perfect merchant. And then almost shy she admits it. Her brother, Ed. The one father excommunicated, the shame of the family. He seems different now, hardworking, diligent, as if he's become a completely different person. And she signs it, from your loving daughter, Tanya Rothtaylor. Now watch who reads it. Crepin Rothtaylor, the patriarch, long blonde hair, dark robes, sitting on a throne, and in his hand he's turning a wavy little dagger. His skill lights up, deadly poison magic, seal of deadly poison. The flavor text, if you're grazed in the slightest, you flail around in pain and you die. That's the man reading his daughter's love letter. And he goes, I've already sent a reply to Tanya. 2 hooded masked vassals kneel in front of him. He tells them the elections, the grimoire negotiations with Rothtaylor, it's all too much for Tanya alone, so he's sending her vassals she can trust. A vassal she can trust, remember that phrase. Be on your way, he says, and they go. And now Tanya does the thing that makes this whole season tilt. She uses her highest magic, cause and effect determination. It costs her a fortune in mana, she says it herself. It's a shame I can't use it often. This is definitely an absolute power. This isn't a guess, this isn't a vibe, this is the future, confirmed, a done deal. And what does she see? Rain, a cliff, and Ed, bloodied, dying, reaching out with one shaking hand, and Vision Tanya, the one inside the crystal, is screaming. Ed, Ed, cradling him while he bleeds out in the storm. And real Tanya, the one holding the crystal ball, staring at her brother's dying face, she frowns. She says it doesn't really feel the greatest, but it's a necessary sacrifice. A necessary sacrifice, her own brother, and the caption drops 3 days before Ed's death. Stop, breathe, here's what I need you to feel right now. The sister foresaw it, the father armed it, the future is locked, cause and effect confirmed, and the entire empire's machinery is sliding toward one rainy cliff. Now let's go watch Ed walk straight into it, wide awake, smiling. 3 days earlier, the chalkboard, President candidate approval rating, and Princess Phonia is on top by a mile. Tanya just deflates. Impossible. Phonia's so beloved across the Klol Empire that Tanya's odds are basically 0. Then this little flex of a scene. Someone calls out, oh, Tanya heading to elemental studies. And the onlookers lose their minds because Tanya casually waves hi to the strongest person in the whole academy. Then hi to Rothtaylor, the red-haired elk trading executive who's like, when works for the grimoire negotiation. Then hi to Lucy Merrill, silver-haired witch hat, Sylvania's best genius, who just goes, hi. Students are stunned. Who are these connections? And privately, Tanya's unsettled. Her status shot up an absurd amount in a few days and she didn't even do anything. She figures it out, it's because she's Ed's sister. The girl who once thought Ed was trash now feels like the trashy one. And then they arrive, Kadic and Nox. It's nice to see you again, Lady Tanya. The vassal's father sent, father's so considerate. Kadic offers to dig up market prices on the grimoire. Nox offers to help with the election, even dig into Phonia's pledges, but Tanya stops him. There's news. Phonia is not running. What? The Imperial Secretary announced it. Everyone's whispering. Tanya prays it's still subject to change. And here's why that matters. The story tells you flat out, Crepin, the kind-faced patriarch, the final boss of the fourth act, hides a darkness only one person ever senses, Princess Phonia. She holds imperial power and academy power, and she's supposed to become the key ally who leads the charge against Crepin's bid to seize Sylvania. So Phonia stepping back, that's not a relief, that's the wrong turn, that's a load-bearing wall coming out. Meanwhile, over with Ed. Janica, pink braids, leaning over him, worried sick he'll do something reckless again and get hurt alone. I'll help you, Ed. She figured he'd back Tanya since Phonia's been mean to him, but now the princess won't run and Janica just wants to know why. And Jix, dark-haired senior, those animal instincts, strolls and teasing them, then gets serious. He thinks he knows why Phonia quit. Her eyes, he says, looked like an alpha wolf who's lost her pack. Like she made one wrong choice and lost all her confidence. No reaction left in her. You could point an arrow at her face and she wouldn't flinch. Then Jix leaves with a warning. It's gonna rain tomorrow. And Ed clocks it. Jix's senses run a level above a normal human's, so when his instincts talk, you listen. Ed lands on the worst case. Phonia has completely lost all hostility toward the Rothtaylers, which is a disaster, but he just exhales. Let's do what we can for now. And Janica brightens. Rain's perfect for training water spirits. Let's go train a mid-rank spirit out at the Northern Cliffs tomorrow after class. And Ed smirks. Thanks, let's just do what we can for now. The Northern Cliffs, in the rain tomorrow. You're screaming at the screen, you've seen this. The crystal ball showed you the cliff, the rain, the blood, and Ed, who knows this game better than anyone, just cheerfully agreed to walk into the exact frame of his own foreseen death. And he's smiling. Quick cut, Lucy, silver hair, lounging on a rooftop, lighting a little fire with magic, dreading the weather. The rain makes Lucy depressed. I hope it passes quickly. Hold on to her, she is going to matter very, very soon. Next day, rain hammering the Northern Cliffs. Ed shows up hooded, his fire spirit mug, that little orange glowing cat, chattering away beside him, gushing about Ed's contract with the mid-rank water spirit, praising his mana arrows, and Ed just goes, be quiet, mug. And then, out of the rain, two hooded figures. It's an honor to see you again, young Master Ed. Ed pulls his bow. A blue mana arrow snaps into place, and the hoods come back. Kadik knocks the vassals she could trust. Act 4's final chapter, the Crepin Showdown. These are its third phase mid-bosses, the men who carry the Rothtaylor family's darkness, and each of them draws a wavy poison dagger, the exact same poison from Crepin's skill card, the exact same rain, the exact same cliff, the exact death Tanya foresaw 3 days ago. And they talk first, they call him young Master Ed, respectful, and they confess they were once ordered to assassinate him. This blade is steeped to kill him, but they claim they've repented, they investigated him, they believe he's returned to his true self as the heir. Reclaim the Rothtaylor name, they beg, restore the family's honor, we'll explain everything to Lord Crepin, it's a redemption offer, take the name, go home, be the prince. And Ed cuts them dead, enough with the bullshit. It erupts, Kadik the Eagle Knight hurls forward sword strikes carved out of wind. Ed answers with green mana and mug and the whole rainstorm catches fire. Nox tries to twist the knife emotionally, invokes a poor blind child named Meliana trying to soften him. Ed fires back, revenge is useless. There's only emptiness at the end of that road. Then Ed lights it up, blessing of wind. His flames swell that green signature, the smell of grass riding the heat. And he overwhelms both of them, they can't believe it. He's standing inside an explosion that should have cooked him alive, standing in the heart of it like it's nothing. Ed reads it, Kadik used Nox's own body as a shield to cover his vitals. Cold, veteran, and Ed presses in for the kill, but this is the end. And then it's not. Because something arrives that even Ed, who knows the entire script, who's read this story like a walkthrough, could not predict. An ice and water attack rips across the cliff. A veteran chokes, I can't breathe. A rare element, the kind where only one exists per element in all of nature. And a hooded silver-haired girl with glowing red eyes drops in almost cheerfully. Sorry Ed, my class ended earlier than expected. It's Lucy, the strongest, the only person alive who could have thrown that technique, and the veterans go white, because now there's a witness. A brown bear knight who thought he'd seen everything the battlefield could throw at a man, and he's looking at something he has never seen before. She looms over the carnage and asks them quietly, do you understand what you just did? Okay, pause, because this is the pivot of the entire season and I need you tracking the sleight of hand because the story is about to perform a magic trick right in front of you. Here's what actually came for Ed on that cliff, the part that gets recapped later. It wasn't just two veterans. The full picture is a giant magic circle and a genius spirit sorcerer capable of summoning a highest rank darkness spirit and the highest rank fire spirit. The narration calls it flat out, absolute death. There is no winning this. The original Ed dies here precisely because no human walks out of absolute death. So Ed doesn't try to walk out. Cut to a calm flashback. Ed earlier reporting how he spent his break. He says he spent it on magic engineering. A great success, because he crafted a legendary rank item, and here it is, Delheim's hourglass. What does it do? It reverts all physical states by a few seconds, every wound, every drop of blood, gone, rewound, one-time use only. You see it now, right? You see the whole con. Back in the rain, bloodied, cornered, dying, Ed burns the hourglass, and reality rewinds a few seconds. The lethal damage just unhappens. He summons his spirits, collapses, wounded but alive, thinking one thing, I can survive. He let the world watch Ed Rothtaylor die, and then he quietly rewound himself back from the dead off-screen where no one could see. Ed Rothtaylor faked his own death using a one-shot legendary artifact he built himself 3 days after his own sister foresaw it in a cause-and-effect vision. He didn't dodge fate, he let fate land, and then he hit the undo button. Janica finds him after. Pink-haired, frantic, devoted Janica. She finds the gravely injured Ed and tucks him into a hidden cave, lights a campfire, promises to bring him daily supplies so he can stay hidden. He thanks her, admits it still hurts, and they sit by the fire in the rain, and the narration says no matter how turbulent Ed's life gets, he always comes back here. It's the one tender breath in the middle of the storm. But out in that storm, the lie Ed planted is detonating. And here is where the story stops trusting you to keep up, and you absolutely have to keep up. Here's the cover story Ed needs the world to believe. The third-year Faculty of Magic student, young Master Ed Rothtaylor, has died, and the assassin was a vassal of the Rothtaylor family. That's the narrative, that's the cover. And now a figure wrapped in green mana stands above the chaos and says those exact words about Ed's death. In the third person, Ed Rothtaylor has died. That figure is Ed. Green mana, grass smell, remember that is him. Ed is disguised now, and to keep the cover airtight he talks about the dead Ed like Ed is some other guy he's mourning. That third-person grief is the disguise working. He watches from atop a wall, fist clenched cold, narrating to himself. Thanks to Ed, Tanya's reputation and life at the academy were improving, but at this rate Tanya is definitely going to die. And the reason Tanya's going to die is named Lucy. Because Lucy Merrill just found out that the boy she was walking toward, the boy whose class she left early for, is dead. And Lucy does not grieve like a person. Lucy awakens. Silver hair, that wide brim witch hat, eyes flooding purple, she erupts. Violent purple magic, eldritch fangs forming in the air, tears streaming, a purple lightning storm cracking the rain apart. Why is this happening? I didn't come to Sylvania for this. There's no peace in my life. The strongest mage in the academy, off the leash, hunting everyone connected to Ed's killers, and Tanya, the alleged Rothtaylor assassin, is right in the blast radius. And now the cliff aftermath turns into a standoff in the storm, so stay with me on who is who, because the story is daring you to mix them up. There's Wade, blonde, glasses, red tie, mourning in voiceover. Thinking about how Ed is dead, I feel desolate. There's Jix, the real Jix, one eye glowing orange, crimson high-collared warrior gear, a spear at his hip, and Jix makes a hard call. I'm going with my judgment, Wade. He decides he's going to grab Tanya and hand her over to Lucy to stop the awakening by force if he has to. I'll be taking Tanya. And the green mana figure, Ed, disguised, will not allow it. He grabs Jix by the wrist to stop him. You're making an unreasonable decision, Jix. Because Ed knows the truth, Jix doesn't. Letting Lucy spill blood, letting her kill Tanya is not what Ed would have wanted. So he says it himself, I'll stop Lucy. Now, there is a fallen man in this scene too. Dark hair, a great sword lying beside him, bleeding out in the rain. And the green Ed snaps at him. What are you doing, idiotic Clebius, lying down in a place like this? Listen carefully, because this is the trap the whole arc is built on and the story wants you to fall for it. Clebius is not Ed. Clebius is a completely separate man. He's a blood swordsman, his mana runs crimson blood red, the opposite of Ed's green. The disguised green figure talking about the dead Ed in the third person and grabbing Jix's wrist, that's Ed. The bleeding swordsman with the great sword on the ground, that's Clebius Nortondale. Two different people. Two different colors. Green is the disguise. Crimson is the swordsman. Do not let the story blur them, because it absolutely will try. And here is the part you have to nail down, because the cover story is going to lie to everyone, including future characters. The person who actually stops and awakens Lucy is the man in green. The man whose mana smells like grass. That is Ed. Clebius gets sent off to recover, and later the world will tell the story like the sword demon held the line, but you saw it. You saw which color of mana ended it. Ed tells Clebius to recover his strength and run to the faculty building before the staff arrive, because the academy staff are on the way and he doesn't know what could happen. And the chapter cuts away to a distant campfire where another spirit is coming. New pieces converging on the storm. And now we get the fight that earns the cover story, because somebody has to actually hold the line long enough for everyone to evacuate, and that somebody bleeds for it. Red sky, pouring rain, and the sword demon Clebius Nortondale unleashes his family's forbidden taboo. The title cards spell it out. This is a cursed sword. The Nortondale family's taboo, blood swordsmanship. His mana goes crimson, blood red, the opposite of Ed's green every step of the way, and he multiplies his strikes. Flow killer times 100, flame pillar, the monster who taught himself the taboo alone. His opponent is Lucy, the witch hat, the purple eye, the purple electric magic. He got faster, and the mechanic here is horrifying and beautiful. In blood swordsmanship, the closer he is to death, the more the mana around his body and his blade swells, so the more Clebius bleeds, the stronger he gets. He's powering himself by dying. Meanwhile, somewhere drier, Lortel Ketchelm, the red-haired merchant in a white gown, receives Tanya, and who escorts Tanya in. The senior Jix, spear and all, a clearly separate man. Thank Jix for coming with you. You're lucky, Tanya, and Lortel drops the line. Have you heard about Ed? In cold as ice, she says if it had been Tanya alone, I would have ripped her to shreds. Then she starts interrogating a captive girl with a blue ribbon who's begging. It wasn't me. Jix checks the facts. That would be rash, Lortel. You're right, Jix, but the narration warns you. Jix froze deep in thought, and Jix hadn't caught on yet. He doesn't know Ed is alive. Nobody does. Back to the storm. A flashback cracks open Clebius, demon red eyes, somebody consoling him. You're not a monster, right, Clebius? A victim forgiving him. It was me you killed this time. I at least can forgive you. Don't blame yourself too much. And Clebius concluding, broken, I don't want to become a hero. I really can't go on any longer. That's the man bleeding himself dry to buy strangers 10 more minutes of escape. And then the narration repositions the whole fight, because as monstrous as Clebius's blood swordsmanship is, as much as he's killing himself to get stronger, the narration says it plainly, it is insignificant in the face of Lucy. Lucy lets the witch hat tilt, and she fires, a purple bolt of devastation that ends it. The blood demon is done, she's won. The crimson swordsman is on the ground. She looks down at the man she's beaten and she sees something impossible. What the? Because a blue-green light has kindled beside the fallen Clebius, grass-colored mana, and it rises into a hooded man, dark hair, blue eyes, calm, the man who actually stops her, not the bleeding swordsman everyone will later say held the line. Him, the green one, the grass smell, the signature you've been holding onto since the cabin in the snow. And Lucy, strongest mage in the academy, the girl who awakened into a purple storm the second she heard he was dead, looks at his face and understands. He was never dead. The grass smell is alive, and she breathes it out, equal parts heartbreak and murder. You were alive, you motherfucker. That's it, that's the peak. A man forged his own death with a legendary hourglass, let the world bury him, and slipped back into it wearing green and a hood. He stood in front of the most dangerous girl alive and stopped an awakening nobody else could touch and let a bleeding swordsman take the credit. The sister who foresaw it, the father who armed it, the cover story that's already spreading. And now, a dead man has to win an election and protect the people he loves from a story that wants every single one of them dead. Phonia's still standing in that doorway in the snow, and Ed Rothtaylor officially no longer exists. So whatever you thought this show was when we started, a tent in the woods, a kid bluffing about mana, look where it landed. He didn't beat the scenario. He died inside it on purpose and walked back out under a name he planted months ago just to keep playing. That's the season, that's the peak, and the man in green is just getting started. She just watched the whole world burn for him and he was alive the entire time. And here's the thing about that moment, Ed doesn't get to celebrate it. Because Lucy seeing him standing there, that's the easy part. The hard part is everyone else, everyone who already buried him, everyone who grieved. So let's go there, let's walk the wreckage of his own funeral from the shadows, one broken heart at a time. Because Ed is still dead, officially, on paper. In every investigation report on the principal's desk, the third-year magic student Ed Rothtaylor was stabbed by his own family's vassals and went off that cliff. The story is set. The alias holds Nortondale, and the man wearing that alias, the man with the green mana that smells like cut grass, he's about to comfort the people mourning his corpse while he's standing right in front of them. First, the rain-soaked ruins. Ed's mind is racing, there's no time, I need to hurry up and decide. And he sees a girl kneeling in the wet. He thinks it's Lortel. It isn't, it's Janica. Janica failover, pink braids soaked flat, one of her own spirits flickering beside her in cold blue light. And the bystanders are whispering. They're saying she's gone half crazy. They're asking if she's completely lost it. Because Janica heard Ed was dead and she just refused to believe it. flat out refused. So this green projection of him, this gentle ghost that isn't a ghost, leans close and tells her something that lands like a blessing. He says, "No, if anything, I think you arrived at the perfect time." He tells her he understands her completely because he has someone he loves too. And you feel it, right? He's not lying to comfort her, he's grieving with her, he's the only one who can. Next, Clebius, and oh, Clebius is in pieces. There's a swordsman lying in the rain, brutally cut up, mana bled out of him like a cracked dam. Ed crouches down beside him. "Clebius, you're alive, of course you are, you stubborn idiot." And Clebius, this proud blade, he's despairing. He's saying all of it was meaningless, he's saying he should have just run. And here's what Clebius did. Remember, just a moment ago Lucy awakened, that purple lightning monster that nearly leveled everything? Clebius held the line. Alone, 10 full minutes, against the awakened one so everyone else could evacuate. He bled himself dry buying time for strangers, and now he's lying here calling it pointless. And Ed won't let that stand. Ed tells him your effort was valuable, truly not meaningless. Thank you Elvira. Clebius, because Ed knows every main character in this academy down to the bone. He's read this story, remember? But he says it himself in his own head. He never once thought anyone, not even him, would actually have the ability to reach these people and console them like this. He knows the script. He just never knew he'd be the one holding the hand. Now hold on, because while Ed is doing the rounds comforting the dead-hearted, there's one person he can't comfort, one person he has to push away, and that's his own sister. The green projection finds Tanya Rothtaylor, and he doesn't soothe her, he commands her. Think clearly, run, take the forked road, lose your pursuers, find help. Lean on being the heir of Rothtaylor, that name still means something. He tells her he'll block the imperial forces and the nobles chasing her, even at the cost of his own life. And Tanya is in total denial, crying, screaming, "He's not dead, Ed's not dead," I said, and the green figure just tells her quietly, "Consider yourself lucky, you're his younger sister, run." Then he turns to Rothtaylor, the red-haired merchant, and he tells her the truth of what's inside her, that just the thought of losing the person you love hurts this much, that her whole body is burning with fury. And behind her a raging crimson figure roars, "The Golden King," all that merchant ice cracking open into pure flame. And Ed tells her this love for him will stay in your heart, it'll become a part of you. And finally, he reaches Lucy. Lucy Merrill, who could not accept that he was gone, and he apologizes. "I'm sorry Lucy, I should have told you in advance, I had to die." And this silver-haired genius, this girl who has never in her life understood what was happening inside her own chest, she just breathes, "I thought you were dead." And he answers, soft as anything, "I'm still here, see, I'm right here." And she says his name back, and then she says her own, "Lucy," like she's hearing it for the first time, like she's a stranger to herself, and her heart starts to burn, that unfamiliar fire she's been carrying, the one she had no name for. It's love, she finally understands. The thing in her chest is love, and it breaks her wide open. Okay, breathe, because the grief was the night. Now comes the morning, and the morning smells like grass. We open on a camp, a silver-haired companion in a wide hat lying back in the hay, and it's Lucy's point of view. She's lingering in this memory, this feeling, because the scent of grass, that's Ed's green mana, that's what calmed her down when she was a monster, and now she's hooked on it, completely, utterly disarmed. And Ed, still hooded, still officially a corpse, is running the plan out loud. "I have to explain my circumstances, but it's hard with this many people around." He counts his allies on his fingers. Janica went after Tanya, he still has to talk to Clebius and Elvira, Jix and Rothtaylor should be okay. And then he turns on Lucy, because somebody owes an apology. "Lucy, you put Clebius and Elvira in the dirt, they got hurt blocking you." Elvira, the wine-haired alchemist, she lost nearly everything on the magic engineering item she'd been building. Clebius bled like a waterfall, that's his whole thing, blood swordsmanship, he cut himself open and spent that blood to fight you. From Lucy's side, she was actually trying to make sure the people coming for her didn't die. But she's the storm, storms don't apologize gracefully. And Lucy just spirals, "They hate me, Ed's disappointed in me." But the second she catches that scent of grass off him, gone, melted, she grabs his sleeve. "Do you really have to go right now?" This terrifying awakened genius reduced to a girl tugging a sleeve because a boy smells like spring. Now, Ophelie's Hall, central entrance. The whole crew assembles, and this is where they get their story straight. Phonia's there, platinum hair, that cyan inside eye of hers catching everything. Rothtaylor, the merchant, Clebius, still bloody red tie, Elvira, Jix with his spear. And Rothtaylor turns to Ed, cool as glass. "So you were safe after all, Ed?" She knew, of course she knew. She reminds him, "You had Delheim's hourglass among the magic engineering items you requested from me." The thing that rewinds your physical state a few seconds wipes out the wound's one use. She says it's important for merchants to stay calm and rational. I was perfectly composed, just checking the facts. Right, Jix? Checking in with her ally. Not some servant, and then the bill arrives because of course it does. There's nothing free in this world. You're going to pay me for making me anxious, right? Pure merchant, the grief is gone, the ledger is back. And then Lucy sees Ed chatting with Rothtaylor, and the jealousy detonates. She latches onto him again. The whole group, Phonia, Janica with her red ribbon, Clebius, they freeze in shock. And Ed internally sounds the alarm. Normally Lucy's actions have no emotion behind them, but my senses are telling me this is an emergency. So they build the lie out loud together. Ed tells everyone he's going to stay dead and gives them his reasons. Lucy apologizes to Clebius and Elvira properly and decides she'll help find Tanya. Jix goes a little wistful about something, and the capstone. Clebius, you have to testify that you stopped Lucy, and Clebius is furious. How am I supposed to say that I blocked that monster? But the story needs a hero who isn't a dead man, so the credit goes to him. The cape, and Lucy bows her head respectfully and heals his injuries with her alchemy. And Rothtaylor writes it all down, a formal guarantee, promising Ed Rothtaylor a steady stream of secret maintenance funds. The money's handled. The case is closed. And then privately, Clebius admits the truth the cover story will bury forever. He looks up and thinks it must have been Ed Rothtaylor who blocked Lucy. In the end, I couldn't beat him again, like an idiot. And Elvira, there's a lot she wants to say, but she just affirms his words. And the two of them, bruised and beaten, lie back and watch the stars. One unnoticed star burning in their eyes. Life is pretty shitty, they decide. And then they just look at the sky. And here's the part I love. Here's the gut punch the narrator saves for last. While everyone in that hall is busy clearing Tanya's name, while they're literally stitching together a story where nobody killed Ed, Tanya herself is out in the woods, alone, wounded, at night, sobbing to her own legs, "Come on, move, I can't be caught." She thinks she's being hunted. She thinks she has to clear the murder accusations against her over Ed, has to run, has to find the truth before they catch her. And the narrator just twists the knife. Unfortunately, no one was chasing Tanya. Nobody thought she killed Ed. The accusation she's fleeing, it doesn't exist. She's sprinting through the dark, shadowboxing a phantom, running from a crime the whole world already forgave her for. And the chapter signs off with this almost tender little command: stay steadfast, Tanya Rothtaylor. Run, girl, run from nothing, we'll see you again. So that's the funeral. Ed walked through every shattered heart: Janica, Clebius, Tanya, Rothtaylor, and finally Lucy, who learned the word for the fire in her chest. The cover story is signed and sealed. Clebius wears the hero's cape he never asked for, the money flows in the shadows, and Ed Rothtaylor is officially gloriously dead. But you can't stay dead forever, not when there's an election coming, not when his little sister is about to climb up onto a podium and confess to a murder she didn't commit. Because somewhere out there a campaign is starting, a countdown is ticking, and the boy in the hood is going to have to decide exactly how, and exactly when, to walk back into the light and say 4 words to the whole academy. I am Ed Rothtaylor. But that's where the dead man comes home, so let's go home with him first. Because before the politics, Ed gets back to work. He's sparring his mid-rank water spirit Laisha, fights her cat form to sharpen his close combat, and Mug the fire spirit is gassing him up, praising his reaction time. Ed admits the high-rank wind spirit Merelda, the one that takes a wolf shape, is just too brutal to spar with, she could flatten him. His status window's almost funny at this point: 18 senior. Achievement unlocked. Elaborate survivor of 1 year. His stats won't budge past level 15 without hidden quests. The man literally cannot grind his way up, he has to outthink the game. Janica shows up in her hood, says she feels safer here now that the camp gives her food and shelter, and Ed teases her until she's flustered that the spirit saw the whole thing. He tells her he's heading to visit Princess Phonia soon. She, blushing, asks for one hug, presses in close, leaves him completely off balance, and she confesses she's walking a tightrope inside her own heart. Because here's the real ask underneath the hug. Janica finally works up the nerve for the scariest question of her life. Can she come live here, with him, at the camp? And Ed, flustered, rigid, doing the responsible adult thing, warns her, "Hey, I'm a man, think carefully about what you're asking." And Janica just blushes to the roots of her hair and says, "If it's you, I'm okay with it, Ed." But it's not really about romance. Ed flips it around, he asks her, "What are you actually running from?" And the mask cracks. Janica confesses she misses having a room of her own, a whole year ground down by everyone's eyes on her, the pressure that once made her go berserk. She calls herself an idiot, and Ed doesn't sugarcoat it. He tells her flat out, "Yeah, your request is burdensome." And then, but that's what life is. Being a burden to others while you carry the burden of others. And she breaks. She just hugs him and sobs into his shoulder. So Ed does what Ed does. He builds something. Down by the river under the Great Spirit's guardian tree, He asks permission to snap off a few branches, thunderstruck thousand-year-old wood, the rarest crafting material in this whole world. And the Great Spirit who answers him takes the form of a beautiful blue silver-haired woman with golden eyes, and she's got a name that should make your ears perk up. Great Sage Sylvania. Remember that name? The Academy is named after a legend. And the legend is sitting right here teasing Ed about whether he's worried about Janica. And with his fire spirit mug and his other spirits all pitching in, a cane that would have taken him months gets carved in about 5 days. A thunderstruck thousand-year-old wooden cane, a magic staff, and he sits there smiling thinking, Janica will like this. Keep that staff in your back pocket, quiet moments in this story always pay off later. And here's where it gets good. Royal dorms, Rothtaylor hooded merchant sipping tea with Phonia and she just casually admits it, she's hunting Tanya, calls herself opportunistic, petty, cruel to the weak, says even royalty can't recklessly swing at a family as powerful as the Rothtaylors, so she's got a plan. Tanya's the weaker one to her, fine. Rothtaylor is going to run for student council president. Make herself the head of the council and the association, a power so high that Tanya has no choice but to come crawling to her. And at the exact same time, different room, bedside, Tanya is confessing to Phonia. The patriarch, Crepin Rothtaylor, ordered the original Ed's death, and she helped make it happen. To survive, to dig out the truth, she's going to run in that same election, student council president. So now you've got 2 women, Rothtaylor and Tanya, squaring off for the same chair. The merchant and the heir, rivals. And the clock resets, administrative delays push it 29 days out, and the whole campaign begins with Ed Rothtaylor presumed 6 feet under. Even Lucy's just bored out of her mind, killing time while the countdown crawls. But before the votes, Ed needs to know something. He needs to know exactly how strong he's gotten because he's the character who's diverged the most from the story he memorized. So how do you measure that? You pick the toughest opponent you can find to spar, Jix, and you go all out. Enter Jix, full power spar. And Jix is a nightmare to fight, silver hair, sword skills, and this freakish versatility. Telekinesis to reposition his own body mid-fight, ice spears, his unique magic letting him wield every weapon type with no limit. Ed throws out the single blade plan immediately, treats it like the real thing. Green mana everywhere, advanced mana armament, conjured weapons, feints to buy seconds for the big spells. And off to the side, Janica's watching, going, ah, Ed, and then just starts cooking curry, worried he won't like the carrots. Hurrying so dinner's ready when the fight ends, priorities. Back to it, Ed counters Jix's teleport-style movement by chaining elements, blessing of wind to swat away surprise attacks, mug for fire blast, Laisha manifesting as this giant blue beast, spirit formula manifest waterhead. Jix is exactly as strong as advertised, so Ed presses convergence, a barrage of green spears, nature's lance, and just tries to flat-out overpower him. Jix runs dry on mana, has to reach for magic engineering tool. Ed reads it instantly, he's empty. This is the end, launches the finisher. And Jix pulls his trump, Glast's Golden Phoenix Ring, a legendary rank tool, just enough mana to half-summon a Golden Phoenix. And here's the moment that actually matters. Ed realizes something. No altar of substitution, no Lucy lending him power, no Janica feeding him mana, he just on his own, completely solo, summoned a spirit in humanoid form, for the first time ever. A blue-haired spirit in a blue dress turns to him, smiles, and says, "You've summoned me, that's a great stride, Ed." It's Merelda, the wind spirit, his, standing there in human shape called by his hand alone. Merelda, yeah, Ed, you did that, that's the leap. But all of that, the training, the spar, the summon, it's prologue. Because now we hit the day everything's been building toward, the election and the public return. Sylvania, the rally, the crowds roaring Lortel Ketcheln's name, the popular merchant candidate, the Elt trading favorite. And then Tanya climbs the podium. Gothic blonde curls, perfect posture, and she opens her speech with a bomb, "I did not kill my elder brother, Ed." Silence, dead silence. The crowd doesn't move, and from the back a hooded figure watches Ed, disguised, and even he can't tell, is this calculated politics, or is his sister for once being completely sincere? She's kept the perfect mask up to the very end, he can't read her. And then, the aura, a purple-haired man and a red-jacketed man in the hall feel something. I've seen that aura before, that spirit aura, that green mana. And Ed Rothtaylor reveals himself, alive, in front of the entire assembly. I am Ed Rothtaylor, I was not murdered by Tanya. Boom, in one sentence he clears his sister's name in front of every witness in the Empire's best academy, and throws the full weight of the Rothtaylor family behind her candidacy. Against the rivals, second-year Jix, Magic Faculty top student Joseph, General top student Wade, with Janica, Lucy and Princess Phonia standing as her backers. The dead man walks back into the light and hands his sister an election. Then come the interrogations. Endless ones. Examiners running the cover story on loop, stabbed, poisoned, used the hourglass to survive, hid in a cave, found by Janica, then sprinted to defend Tanya at the podium. Ed confirms it all, exhausted, having lost count of how many times he's repeated it. And just when he thinks it's finally over, Magic Faculty third year Ed Rothtaylor. Enter, summoned face to face with the principal, but that's a door for later. Now, the aftermath, and this is where the manhwa quietly drops the smartest move of the whole arc on you. The election's called. Tanya's innocence is proven, support floods in, but the narration's blunt about it. The decisive factor wasn't Tanya at all. It was Lortel Ketcheln's collapse. An article drops. Lortel embezzled the Elt Trading Company's funds, threatened its clients, scandal, disgrace. She steps down from the race, leaving only Tanya's camp standing. Tanya wins, becomes student council president. She meets Ed, tearing up, thanking him for taking her side up on that stage. And Ed just says it plain, we're family, of course I had to. But Lortel, red hair, watching from the edge, she muses that Ed's nice to have as family. Because here's the truth the narration finally hands you. Lortel torched her own reputation on purpose. She published her own scandals. She made herself the villain, turned a crowded race into a two-way fight, erased every other candidate and made absolutely sure Tanya would win. She even went to Phonia and faked hostility toward Tanya to sell it. And why run the math? Ed saved her life, so Lortel's his now. And Tanya, a true insider of the Rothtaylor family now sitting as student council president, is the perfect pipeline, perfect for information, perfect for launching smear campaigns straight at the family, whose patriarch is Crepin Rothtaylor, Ed's enemy, the Act 4 final boss. Lortel didn't just lose an election, she built Ed a weapon aimed at his father. The role of a villain suits me best, she says, accepting a ruined name like it costs her nothing. And step way back for a second. Remember 3 days before Ed's death. Remember Tanya in the rain, screaming his name, watching him die in her own vision. That whole grief, that whole death, it was the fuse. And here at the end of this run, the explosion finally settles into shape. Ed alive, his name clean, his sister crowned, a merchant who burned herself down to arm him, and a father who has no idea the war's already started. Ed heads back to the wilderness camp, tidies up, finally rests under the night sky. 3 days later, Tanya's appointment is made official, and there's even a little breather. Professor Melina pulls Janica aside about grades and combat training, then teases her that she's obviously in love with Ed, that the whole academy already thinks they're dating. Janica, bright red, completely flustered. So that's the political end game. Ed's back from the dead, the board is set, Crepin's in the crosshairs, and for one quiet night everything's calm. Because the quiet is about to end, hard. Listen for the bells. A giant golden carriage, guarded like an entire army is escorting it, comes rolling towards Sylvania, and on top of it sits the most important religious figure in the empire. The Holy Pope, and he's not alone. He turns and says, we'll be at Sylvania soon. Because the Pope is bringing the Saintess, both of them, at once. Episode 3, the card drops. The failed swordsman of Sylvania, second joint combat training. And Ed, our man who knows the future like it's a script, narrates the scariest line he can possibly say. This is now unknown territory. The plot might flow the way he remembers it, or it might flow somewhere completely, terrifyingly new. Spoiler, it's the second one. Because the Saintess shouldn't be here. Saintess Claris, white hair, red eyes, the literal heart of the Holy Order, the one who guards the sacred fire and hides her face from the world. She is off script. She's not supposed to be at this academy at this moment at all. And she's panicking because she's convinced Ed Rothtaylor can read minds and might already know who she really is. So she does the only thing that makes sense to her terrified little heart. She decides she has to meet him. Immediately, even though her own maid attendant, dark hair, golden eyes, does not want that meeting to happen, not even a little. Okay, stop. Why does the Saintess of the entire empire want to throw herself at a fallen, supposedly dead noble boy? Hold that question. Because the answer is about to crack this whole video wide open. First, the dragon. The joint combat training kicks off. Ed has no challengers on the board, which annoys him because he wants a fight. He steps into a mock duel against a 4th year, a hunky rank 2 named Kordek Valadern, who swaggers in with a giant enchanted sword and tells Ed not to go easy on him. Ed just smirks. Ha, and then he lights him up, mugs orange fire, and the water spirit laces blue power, crashing together, and Kordek goes down, decisively. The kid sent 0 challenge requests and still looks like a monster, and the whole crowd is stunned. And then, on his way through, Ed runs into someone he didn't plan for, a blonde woman. She smiles and says, "Oh my, we meet again, Ed," and then like she's commenting on the weather, "You will die soon." You will die soon. The ground answers her, an earthquake, a surge of power so far past anything Ed predicted that his future knowledge just breaks. A colossal tower of blue ice and crystal erupts into the sky, and Ed recognizes it, a being thought extinct even in legend. The sacred lance dragon of Denawa, its final boss, sacred lance dragon Welbrick, has awoken. And Welbrick doesn't fight, Welbrick walks. The colossal blue-armored dragon lifts one foot, takes a single step, and the campus comes apart. Students are flung like leaves, crushed. Ed only survives because he happened to be inside the faculty building, and he knows looking up at this thing he might never use magic again. But he's already made peace with it. He decides he'd die either way, so he'll act, even if it costs his life. Across the wreckage in Trix Hall, the knights are screaming for the Saintess to run, and her escorts get cut down right in front of her. I will escort you to the carriage we prepa, gone. A dying red-haired knight tells her the carriage is destroyed, but a horse can still carry her across the Mexis Bridge off Arkan Island. And Clarice just breaks down crying in a field of corpses, remembering how the Archbishop used to read to her when she was small. Up high, an old green-haired Professor Mage throws everything he has at the dragon, a massive nullification barrier, the highest strength telekinesis, chains of providence binding Welbrick, muttering that the dragon has awoken far too early. And Lucy, our Lucy, which hat purple lightning, the strongest mage of the era, drops in. This wasn't what I had in mind, old man. And she hammers Welbrick with a chain of purple destruction so violent the recoil makes her scream. The old mage thanks her for the seconds she bought and raises a golden shield of the god of creation. And in the middle of all of it, bloodied and despairing, what do I do now? Clarice gets found by Ed, riding in on Merylda, his wind spirit surging up in her great wolf form. He asks if she's hurt, tells her he guessed she'd be at Trix Hall, tells her to hold on tight, and they run. But Ed's brain is already turning, because human strength cannot beat Welbrick, he knows that. The original plot has completely shattered, which means someone pushed it off the rails, and it's not Clarice, she knows nothing. It's not Taylor, the actual protagonist, he's busy saving people. So who is the other person rewriting this story? And the answer walks, calmly, through the bloody rubble, a girl with a stringed instrument slung across her back strolling through the ruin like it's a garden path, and she muses to herself, what a shame we could have met. But I'm sure fate will have us meet one day, it's always been that way. Her face lit red, glowing yellow-green eyes, a knowing little smirk. There's a second player on this board, a second person bending the plot exactly like Ed does. Burn that into your memory because we are not done with her. But not today. Today, the truth that lands belongs to the Saintess. Because here's where everything you thought you understood flips inside out. Ed gets Clarice to Opheles Hall, where barrier magic is somehow still holding. And the person keeping that barrier alive on the top floor, a woman named Miss Bell, mortally wounded in the dragon's first strike, who dragged herself up the stairs and held the shield in case anyone else was still alive. And a grieving pink-haired girl is begging Ed, calling him senior, please, tell me Belle will be all right. Ed goes to assess the dragon. Out the window he sees something that shouldn't exist, an abnormal aspectual magic circle materializing in the sky, a method of casting that isn't the old professor's, isn't Lucy's, isn't anyone's he knows. And he realizes Welbrick has been resurrected and that the other plot changer has vanished. The dragon's blast hits him, he can't fully block it, and bleeding out, running out of time. He turns to the pink-haired girl and entrusts her with a code, the tale of that same impossible number. He mutters, 160. A blinding light detonates, and she's sobbing, I'll do anything, you can't die in my place. And around her so many dead, including Ed, she repeats, I'm sorry, and a single red eye snaps open. Cut broad daylight, a public cafe, sunlight, and the silver-haired red-eyed Saintess wakes up her table and across from her sits Ed. Healthy, unharmed, not a scratch on him, and she lunges at him. The whole cafe gasps that the Saintess has come for that guy Ed. And as she grabs him, as she checks his body and finds no wounds, no blood, nothing, it crashes into her all at once. That apocalypse wasn't a dream, it wasn't a vision. The dragon, the corpses. Ed dying, it was real, every second of it, which means only one thing. She has come back to the past. Everything points to one impossible conclusion. The Saintess Clarice has come back to the past, a regressor, a time looper, or so it seems. She has lived that disaster and she has died and she has woken up here before it all again. And she is about to tell Ed the thing that will hollow you out. In the fleeing carriage, she confesses it. She's done this before, she already died once and came back, and in her past life, Ed died saving her, crushed under falling rubble. And the last thing he told her every single time was to always come to him for help, no matter what. And Ed, instead of calling her insane, proves he believes her. He proves he knows the truth. He recites a string of numbers no soul in this world could ever decode. 155000160. And then he tells us what it is. It's his military service number, from before he came to this world, etched on the old dog tag of a man from another life entirely. And the loops spill out. The carriage, the eastern route, the western seaside cavern that collapses on top of them, her fourth regression, her 22nd regression. Different roads, different days, the exact same ending. Every single time Ed dies, the Pope never there, the Archbishop never there. Just a girl cursed with a damned blessing that drags her back to the start to watch the same man die over and over and over again. She curses it. She weeps that he died for her and she could do nothing, and time rewinds. Back at the bridge one more time and Ed stops the carriage. He's not supposed to do that. In every loop she's ever lived, this is the part where she runs and where he dies. But this time he stops. He pulls her down. He drapes his jacket over her exhausted, bruised, broken little body. And he tells her to rest. He tells her he doesn't know how many times it's been for her, but he knows a couple of people worth asking for help. And for the first time in countless loops, the first time across every road she has ever run down with a corpse in her arms, the man who always dies takes the initiative. He breaks the pattern. The script she has been trapped inside finally cracks, and the chapter closes on his green mana glow and 4 words that change everything. Something has changed. Something has changed. The Saintess has spilled the loop, but not the whole truth of who she is or who that girl with the instrument and the glowing eyes really is. There's a second plot changer on this board, and her name is the last domino. The dragon is still coming, the Pope and the Archbishop are still missing, and Ed Rothtaylor, for the first time in this poor woman's endless nightmare, is alive when he should be dead. So buckle in, because in the finale, the Saintess's real secret detonates, the second player steps into the light, and the whole season comes screaming to its climax. Stay right here. So Ed does the one thing he has never done in any version of this story. For the first time in who knows how many lifetimes, and I mean that literally, he stops the carriage himself. He pulls Clarice down off the bench, he drapes his own jacket over her bruised little shoulders, and he tells her quietly to rest. I don't know how many times it's been for you, he says, but I know a couple of people worth asking for help. And the Saintess just stares at him. Silver hair, those red star-pupil eyes. She stares like she's looking at a stranger wearing a face she's watched die 100 times. Because in every loop before this one, Ed died on script. He died on the bridge, he died in the carriage. He died telling her to come find him no matter what, no matter how long it took. He never once took the wheel. This time he does. Green mana glows in his palm, and the world holds its breath. You already know the shape of it. In every life before this one, Ed died saving her. What you don't know yet is how hard she fought to outrun it. 4th loop, 22nd loop, the eastern road, a seaside cavern that buries them both. It never mattered. The storm always found them, and Ed always died in her arms, cursing her damned blessing, while she sobbed that she could do nothing. Nothing, though who was really turning back the clock, that she has no idea yet. And here's the detail to hold onto because it matters later. The Holy Pope, the Archbishop, never there, never at the academy when the disaster hits. Funny that, file it away. And the proof Ed gave her, that string of numbers, his old service number, it belongs to the masked soldier dying in the rain, way back at the very start of all this. The man who closed his eyes in one world and woke up inside a villain's body in another. That's how Ed convinced her he sees this loop through the very same eyes she does. And he reasons it out cold. If time really rewound, then aspectual magic is involved, the one school of magic that can bend time itself. And large-scale rewinding like this should be flat-out impossible for any human to pull off. Which means something is deeply, structurally wrong with this island, something bigger than a runaway carriage. So he makes a choice. He decides to believe her absurd, impossible story completely, no hedging. And he turns to the grizzled veteran coachman and tells him to ram the carriage straight through the Elt Trading Company cargo jamming up the Mexis Bridge. Everyone's in danger. Breaking through is the only thing that matters now. So this is the moment the season detonates. Ed Rothtaylor, still wearing his combat alias Nortondale out in the field, still a confirmed dead man to the rest of the world, is now racing to stop the resurrection of a god-eating dragon. And to do it, he has to learn the one thing the original story never bothered to tell him. Who is actually changing the plot? Because it isn't Clarice, she's a victim, she knows nothing. It isn't Taylor, the real protagonist, too busy out there saving people to notice. There's a second hand on the chessboard moving pieces in the dark this whole time, and her name is Adele. Adele. Remember the girl with the stringed instrument walking through the bloody rubble, smirking that fate would bring the two of them together? The wandering minstrel. The lute on her back. Here's her story, and I'll be honest, it'll break you a little. She was a war refugee's daughter. Her parents fled their homeland for the trade city of Oldek, got scammed out of everything, and died poor, leaving her an orphan at the Deldaros orphanage run by the Order of Telos, a tiny girl learning holy hymns with a lute in her hands. And one day, Archbishop Verdio himself comes to the orphanage to negotiate offerings. A fire breaks out at the altar, and little Adele, who saw it in a dream the night before, puts it out before anyone burns. She has precognition. She sees the future once or twice a month in pieces, and Verdio sees gold. He names her the Saintess of Telos, poverty to luxury overnight, baptized 3 times by the Holy Pope and the Archbishop themselves. But at her final baptism, the stigmata, for the very first time, Adele sees her own future. And what she sees is the great blue god-eating holy lance dragon of creation. Welbrick and herself laid out and offered up as a living sacrifice to seal it, her own death in a vision in full color. So she runs. She tells Verdio she quits. He refuses, tells her that her time-twisting gift is the entire reason she was chosen in the first place, and she runs anyway. She becomes a keeper of the holy flame, a lute player, a nobody on purpose, anything to dodge that one vision. And here's the rot at the center of all of it, Verdio's scheme. The Order's finances are dying, so the plan is monstrous, and it's monstrous in how simple it is. Revive the Holy Lance Dragon, let the fear of it spread across the entire world, whole kingdoms certain the end has come, and then have the Order publicly, heroically subjugate it, a staged miracle of God, to swell the congregation, to flood the holy capital with gold, and to put the whole empire back down on its knees in front of Telos. And the price of that miracle, you sacrifice the Saintess. Her life seals the dragon, that's the cost. Adele finally understands. The sacrifice was always supposed to be her. From the very beginning, the gift, the luxury, the baptisms, she was being fattened for the altar. Years pass, and a new gifted girl gets quietly groomed as the next Saintess. Clarice, and the guilt-ridden Adele, who ran from her own death and left this child to inherit it, sings songs of freedom to her, begs her to run, drops hints, names the Dempia swamp Oldek Sylvanus, places to disappear to. And then Adele flees again and washes up at Sylvania Academy as a wandering minstrel. 2 Saintesses, 1 scheme, and I need you to keep them straight for the rest of this because the whole finale turns on it. Clarice, the believer, the silver-haired girl, the one being groomed for the altar right now, and Adele, the runner, the blonde, the one who saw the end and has spent her whole life trying to outrun it. And now, the loops. Here's the secret Adele's been hiding the entire season. Her aspectual magic uses holy power to wrap around the world's flow of time. She can loop the disaster, again and again. She shielded herself from the cursed necklaces effect, and she has been rewinding over and over and over, and not to save herself, to save Clarice, to pull that innocent girl off the sacrificial circle before the apostles can ever drag her onto it. So understand what's been happening under the surface this whole time. The loops you thought were Clarice's, the rewinds keeping that carriage running again and again, that's Adele, the original Saintess, burning the last of herself to keep a younger girl off the altar. But holy power has a floor, and Adele is almost out. Just 1 or 2 more times, she says, bloodied, exhausted on the chapel steps, running on fumes. And that exact moment is when a calm, light-haired young man with a flower corsage walks up to her and offers her a choice, orange juice or cold water. Yeah, that's Ed. The second hand on the board just found the first. And the present crashes back in, Ed, the Saintess, and a clock that will not stop. They have to stop the resurrection, and step 1 is finding the Holy Pope and the Archbishop, both of whom conveniently vanished right around the Mexis Bridge right before the joint combat training kicks off. Remember, the Pope and the Archbishop never at the Academy when it all goes down. There's a reason for that. They're not victims of the disaster. They're staging it. So Ed hires Lortel, the red-haired merchant, because all information on Arkan Island flows through her, every rumor, every shipment, every secret, and she warns him dryly that she's charging him extra for the emergency rate, and Ed of all people praises her, tells her she shines brilliantly in moments exactly like these, her calm, her cold, rational judgment, the way she doesn't flinch. Which leaves Lortel completely flustered, red to the ears, and deeply suspicious about why this boy is suddenly being so nice to her. Then the carriage gets ambushed. In the rain, the horses go down, Ed's bleeding, and somebody has to hold the rear so the others can break free. Lortel volunteers. She says she needs to buy some insurance. She tells Ed plainly that she believes in him, and then she squares off against a green-eyed, masked enemy as Ed and the Saintess ride off into the dark on the one barely living horse they've got left. They reach the Academy Cathedral, and standing in the doorway, the Apostles of Telos. Let me tell you what that means. 8 people. In the entire world, only 8 people hold that title. Holy sorcerers so strong that even Lucy would struggle against them. Utterly, fanatically loyal. Willing to die the instant the Saintess says the word, and their only weakness is that exact same thing, that devotion. They can be aimed, they can be lied to, they can be told a sacrifice is holy. A winged apostle blocks the door on Holy Pope Eldine's orders. No one passes, it's all for the Saintess's sake. And Ed, bleeding half-dead, running on nothing, fights anyway. Wind blade, green mana, thrown against the apostle's holy body, awakening, a technique that turns every drop of magic into raw physical force, and a golden holy lance swinging straight for his skull. The apostle taunts him, "You've lost too much blood, boy, give up." Not yet. He pulls a blue magic engineering weapon. He layers in his water spirit. He layers in Mug's fire on top of that, and he keeps swinging. And in his head, the coaching he gave Clarice runs on a loop, the same speech he gave that girl, loop after loop. I can't tell you to give up, so break through, understand exactly what's happening, hold your heart steady, give it everything you've got, and if time rewinds just one more time, finish it perfectly. He lands the blows, the apostle screams. And then Ed coughs blood and folds, he collapses, and a girl in a white dress catches him before he hits the ground, screaming, "Don't die on me, Ed." And past that locked door in the sacred chamber, the Saintess finds her. A gravely wounded figure bearing a holy blessing mark. And not just any mark, a single mark that takes the combined power of the Archbishop, 6 bishops, 8 apostles, and the Holy Pope himself just to create. And in the whole world, only one living person could ever carry it. "You're Adele." And Adele, dying, just smiles up at her. "You're here sooner than expected." Because she's the one who's been looping all of it, the original Saintess. Burning the very last of her holy power to keep a younger girl off the altar, and now she's nearly empty, lying broken in the dark, smiling because at least the plan worked. At least this time, Clarice made it here. So now the two of them split the work. Clarice goes back to face the order, Ed goes hunting for Adele. And inside the cathedral, Clarice finds them, the hooded apostles and Archbishop Verdio, all of them gathered around the red rune of sacrifice, ready. Saintess Clarice. And she rips the whole conspiracy open right there to their faces. The order broke, desperate, rotting from the inside, plans to revive the Holy Lance Dragon and then fake its sealing. A false miracle, to grow the flock, to enrich the capital, to seize power over the entire empire. And Verdio apologizes to her, coldly, gently, almost like she's already a corpse he's stepping over. When she tells him the apostles are simply too strong, that nothing can be done against creatures like that, a voice cuts in from the side. Force alone isn't a big concern. And purple lightning erupts across the chamber. A witch-hatted dark magician, violet eyes glowing in the gloom, smashes the apostles aside like they're furniture and says casually, "Nope. You know exactly who that is, the strongest mage of the era, the monster of Sylvania. Lucy." And now it's war inside the cathedral. Lucy against the entire order. The 8th seat Linos, the 2nd seat Reuben, golden-winged apostles crashing against her purple spatial magic. She traps a clutch of them in chronistic aspectual magic, a time prison frozen mid-strike, and one of them, desperate, screams out a name. "Brother Taldarak. Remember that name, Taldarak, he's coming." Ed comes in from the flank, ambushes a fleeing apostle with a sudden burst of fire, Mug cheering him on the whole way. "Yes, young Master Ed." Corners another one hiding deep in the dense forest, takes him down clean, and then he mutters the one thing that should genuinely scare you. Archbishop Verdio is strong. Because the clock is running out. Even with Lucy here, even with the strongest mage of the era in the room, Ed is afraid they're going to fail. He wishes, desperately, that Adele could rewind time just one more time, just once. And Adele, dying blonde, that braid undone, tells him it's okay if he fails. And Ed knows that's a lie because her power is nearly gone and she could drop dead any second now. There is no one more time, this is the last run. So he channels blue magic and he resolves it. He'll subdue Verdio, get the cursed necklace off the island, relay the truth to the world, knowing that the cost of all of it is Adele sacrificing herself all over again. Bloodied, battered, swaying on his feet, Ed thinks one clear human thought. I don't want to die. And this is the thing you have to understand about this finale. We have seen how it ends when Ed loses. A past loop, pull it up. A bloodied Lucy cradling a mortally wounded Ed in her arms, and he's begging her, flee, get out, leave me, and she says, no, I don't have to. She's done waiting, she'd rather die right there in his arms than run one more step without him. Her walls come all the way down, every last one. I can't live without you, so please don't go away. And it starts to rain, and neither of them resists it, and they die there together beneath a blood-soaked monument as the rain comes down. That's one ending. That is exactly what's waiting if Ed is a half-step too slow. The rain, the dragon reviving once again, and Verdio's leftover authority quietly covering up every body, every truth, every loop. And here is what makes this run different from every single villain you've watched Ed outsmart all season long. Ed doesn't have the hourglass anymore. Delheim's hourglass, the legendary one-time item he forged with his own hands, the one he burned to fake his own death, to walk away from Kadic and Nox in the rain, to become a dead man, to disappear. Remember the forged death on the cliff? The whole season this man has had a reset button sitting in his pocket. A bad ending 27 he could simply rewind himself out of if things went wrong. Not now. The hourglass is ash, it's spent, which means for the first time in this entire story, Ed Rothtaylor can actually permanently die. No do-over, no regression, no quiet rewind back to the carriage. The death flags are real now, and every one of them is pointing at him. So, back to the present, the race. Ed has to seize the dragon's fang necklace and reach the cathedral before the order completes the ritual. Gloating priest crows out, the order will rise to glory once again. And Ed answers with green mana blasting straight through the old priest, through a hooded figure begging him to stop, every single step of it carrying the memory of Clarice. Dragging him into her carriage, loop after loop after loop, patiently explaining the rewind and that service number like he was a brand new recruit who'd never died before. Because to her, every loop he hadn't. And then a blue-skinned, grinning apostle rises up in a wash of golden light and taunts him. Do you truly believe you can win against the holy apostles of Telos? And here's the line that closes everything Ed has been circling all season long. All the way back, the whole arc, it has been about exactly one thing: save Janica. He told himself again and again in every fight, every gamble, every forged death, save Janica. The sweet, doting spirit sorceress with the pink braids and the red eyes, the girl who refused point-blank to ever let him bleed alone. And what Ed realizes, staring up at a golden god in the doorway, is that the help he needed, the real help, the kind he never even had to explain himself to, it was always beside me and far stronger than me. His green spirit bird manifests, the air splits open, and there she is. Strawberry pink braids, red eyes, green spirit magic blazing off both her hands, the ally the show has been quietly telling you was the strongest spirit summoner of them all. Let's go, Ed. The trump card just walked onto the board. And the real climax, the real one, is about to begin. So here's where it all comes crashing together. Everything Ed memorized, every loop he survived, every death he forged. It all funnels down into one cathedral, one falling sky, and one question he can't answer anymore. Can a man who knows the script survive the exact moment the script runs out? Let's go. Ed is racing the clock. He has to seize Welbrick's fang necklace and reach that Academy Cathedral before the Order of Telos completes the ritual. Because the second they finish, the sacred lance dragon Welbrick revives, and Verdio plans to use the entire weight and authority of the Holy Order to bury the truth underneath it forever. And Janica Failover steps in at his shoulder. And remember, way back at the very start, the whole reason Ed ever bent the original story in the first place was to save this girl. That was the choice that started all of it. The choice that set everything in motion. And now the girl he rewrote fate itself for is the one standing between him and an entire army of apostles. The escape goes airborne. The towers coming down around them, explosions tearing through the stone, and Ed casts his wind dragon spell to rip the two of them free of it. But even mid-fall, even with the sky on fire, Ed is still trying to push her away. I told you to escape on your own. Find Pula and find your homeland. Because if she stays, the Order hunts her too. She gets dragged into this whole incident and she never ever gets back out. Janica refuses, flat total no. She tells him she's been suffering alone too, all this time, and she will never just stand there and watch him suffer by himself. Whatever his fate is, she's taking half of it. And cut through all of this, you can still hear Clarice's voice pleading, only Ed can do this. Only Ed, who knows everything that's happened and exactly how it all ends, can stop Vertio, stop the dragon, and win over the Holy Pope himself. So Janica steels herself, I believe in you, I'll do it. And then she reaches for the one thing she's been holding back this entire series. Freed. The first of all water spirits to ever gain life. The single strongest water spirit in existence. A unique being in all of nature, there is only one Freed anywhere ever, not the blue water dragon you glimpsed back at Ophelie's Hall. That was a fraction of her. This is Freed. And remember who Janica is. This whole time the show has been quietly telling you Janica is the ally who's secretly the strongest spirit summoner of them all, and here, right here, is the proof. When the moment finally comes, she doesn't summon a soldier, she doesn't summon a familiar. She summons a god of water. But the apostles answer in kind. The third seat, Lightspeed Taldarak, floods the entire battlefield with hundreds of golden lightning spirits screaming for the necklace, and the whole sky lights up molten gold. Janica overexerts herself. She burns, a literal fever, her body cooking itself from the inside out from the sheer magic she's forcing out of her own veins. Ed reaches over to check her temperature and she flusters, "Eek, don't, my fever will just get worse." But she does not stop, not for a second. She keeps fighting to help him stop that dragon. And the enemy lays down the ultimatum. Hand over the necklace or both of you die where you stand. We are stronger. Ed says one word, no. And now listen close, because here is what makes this different from everything that came before it. Ed tells them flat out, he can't regress anymore. The hourglass is gone. Delheim's hourglass, the one-time legendary item he burned to fake his own death and survive that cliff. The quiet cheat code that's been underwriting every reckless suicidal thing he's done all season long, it's spent. There is no rewind left. In every death he's already lived through, every loop where he bled out in Lucy's arms in the rain, those memories are still fresh, still screaming. Right there in his head. So for the very first time in this entire story, Ed can actually die, for real, no reset, no do-over. This is the first time the stakes have ever been real and he knows it, he can feel it. I don't like killing, he says, but you've left me no choice. Mug ignites, a dragon of pure fire erupts off of him. Freed spirits surge in to meet the gold, protect Ed, and the two armies of spirits detonate against each other in a wall of steam and light. Bloodied, wreathed in flame, Ed plants his feet against a tide of golden lightning and he swears it. That's why I will survive. Okay, take a breath, because we are at the climax now and there are two battles happening at the exact same time. Out on Arkan Island, Ed is one-on-one with the Apostle Taldarak. No hourglass, no safety net, no notes, and inside the Order's chamber the Saintess Clarice is about to set off a bomb of her own. Let's take them one at a time. First, Ed against Taldarak. The magic reaction is weakening with distance, which means technically Ed could just keep running, get clear. Except if he runs any farther the dragon revives, so he can't. He's trapped by his own mission, nailed to the spot by the one thing he came here to stop. And Taldarak, Lightspeed is not a flattering nickname, it's a description. His holy body awakening converts raw magic power directly into physical speed, and he closes the entire gap before Ed can so much as blink. And the only reason Ed even knows what this man can do, the only reason is that he already died to him once in a previous loop. Escape is off the table, so Ed burns his green wind magic, Blessing of Wind, a one-time counter used and gone, and just blows the ambush apart. Taldarak snarls. So you intend to resist after all? Ed presses in, fuses water and fire together, ignition, a blast of scalding steam across the field. But here's Ed's fatal flaw, and he knows it better than anyone. He has no decisive firepower. He's a tactician, a planner, a man who wins on information, not a sledgehammer. And Taldarak overpowers him by juggling multiple high-rank spirits at once, more than Ed can answer. And Ed does the math even now, even cornered, this is the ceiling. This is the absolute limit of the mana she was able to channel into him. He remembers a past loop where Merrill did just handled all of this, where this exact fight was easy, where it wasn't even close. This time it isn't easy, this time it's a wall. Cornered, battered, out of clever ideas, do I really have no other options left? And here's where Ed does the unthinkable. He stops looking for an exit, he stops looking up or out or forward, He sinks down into the depths of his own mind toward a sensation he knows more intimately than anything else in 2 whole lives. A door with 1 word on it. Death. He's reaching for the place where all of those deaths live. And the memories detonate. Every death he's ever survived floods back up through him as raw power. The status numbers spike. Spirit connection level 18 up. Spirit manifestation 13 up. Mug's formula efficiency phase shifts wide open. Leisha's connection climbs. He's overloading himself right on the razor's edge of dying because dying is the only key he has left. The only one. And it works. Complete manifestation. The high-rank wind spirit Merylda, Ed's wind spirit, the one that's been at his side since the very beginning of all of this, finally hits her full form. Not a wisp, not a breeze, not a familiar. A great dragon. You wanted a dragon climax. The Order spent this entire arc scheming, killing, and looping just to revive theirs. And Ed just grew his own from the inside out, from the place where all his deaths are buried. And Taldarak, Lightspeed, the apostle who has personally killed Ed before, who's seen this boy die and stay dead, just freezes. Stunned, stopped cold, and even Ed isn't sure this is going to work. He has no guarantee, but he decides right there that he would rather keep struggling, ugly, unsightly, half-dead in the middle of all these monsters than just stand there and die quietly. That's the whole man right there. That's Ed Rothtaylor in one image. Now the other battle, inside the cathedral. Bloodied but standing, the Saintess Claris walks straight up to Archbishop Verdio and lays his entire scheme out bare in front of everyone. Use Welbrick's necklace. Revive the sacred lance dragon. Have the apostles heroically slay it for the cameras. And feed the Saintess herself into the rune of sacrifice to seal the whole bargain. The clergy reel. How do you know all this? Because, and this is the reveal part 4 left you sitting on, she has lived this through Adele's loops. She has watched the Order fail to subjugate that dragon over and over and over, the same doomed moment repeating without end. And at the end of all of it, here she is, standing in front of Verdio, one more time. Your plan is going to fail, Verdio. She refuses the rune, and she argues it cold and clear. Her death plus that song of truth would make the entire world distrust the Order forever, and in the chaos that follows, countless innocent people would die. It isn't a holy sacrifice, it's the first body in a massacre. And then she invokes the one authority that Verdio cannot argue around, the Holy Pope. And the old man rises, Holy Pope Eldine, and he confesses he's been a coward for decades. Frozen the whole time, caught between the doctrine he was sworn to uphold and the reality he could see rotting away underneath it. He saw it all, and he did nothing. And right here, right now, he chooses. He places the entire future of the Order into Claris's hands. I will follow your will. That's all she needs. Claris excommunicates Archbishop Verdio on the spot, in front of God and all of them. And Verdio just laughs. He grabs her wrist, tells her it's already too late. The boy already ran off with the necklace. The apostles are already hunting him down, and the dragon's revival cannot be stopped now. It's over. And Claris gives him the answer of the entire arc. The person who grabbed my arm and ran with me is far stronger than you. She breaks his grip, and she lets the holy light go, divine power discharge, magic that nullifies magic and lands as pure, crushing physical force. And it slams Verdio down into the floor in a flood of white light. And there's this gorgeous little grace note here that I have to give you. Verdio, going down, asks her why she's become so colorful. Because she isn't the plain, blank white Saintess anymore, something's different about her. And Claris explains it to him. As both a Saintess and a student, she learned something. Pure white light isn't actually white at all. It's red and blue and turquoise and violet, all of it braided together. Strands that only look white when they're gathered up close and you stop paying attention. A prism lesson. The kind of thing you learn in a classroom. The kind of thing she learned at the academy, sitting in a desk, beside Ed, beside Lortel. The Saintess got more human by going to school. I love this story. Now here's the part that should give you genuine chills, because remember the whole premise of this thing. Ed has the original story memorized. He knows there's a thing called the bad ending 27, and a scripted future where specific people die right on schedule. So let's go check the original script. Let's see what Ed just did to it. We cut over to episode 3, The Failed Swordsman of Sylvania, the second joint combat training. In the original scenario, the way the story was supposed to go, the upperclassman protagonist Taylor fights a wave of monster first years. He beats Claude, the top alchemy student who refuses to lose and chugs the blood of the evil god Mebular, and transforms into Claude, alchemist of calamity. Taylor's upgraded elemental slash, now strong enough to cut through every element, even darkness itself, slays him. And the crowd cheers Taylor, the powerhouse, the hero. And then, on his way out in the original story, Taylor gets the news. His comrade Adele Saris is dead, sacrificed on a blood rune, in a cathedral. Except that news never comes. Because Ed interfered, Adele's scripted death never happened, so Taylor and his friends never get the message. The whole disturbance inside the order gets quietly settled as an internal matter, swept up before anyone outside ever hears a word. And the Saintess of Distrust, the broken, world-hating, vengeful Saintess that Clarice was always supposed to curdle into, that person never comes to exist at all. Which means the Sacred Lance Dragon never revives early. The Order's army never descends on Arkan Island. The necklace just sinks harmless beneath the water, gone for good. And Episode 3's rampaging boss, awakened Lucy, the catastrophe, the monster, never appears. In the original timeline, Lucy awakens into a horror. In Ed's new timeline, Lucy is just lounging around the peaceful academy, bored, idly muttering that she could really go for some meat jerky. That's the butterfly, that's the whole thing. Ed reached back into a story he was never supposed to be able to touch, and he erased 3 things clean off the timeline at once. Adele's death, the dragon disaster, and awakened Lucy. Gone, all 3. The original plot has officially derailed. 2 days later, let's land this thing. Ed goes to check on Janica at the cottage. And there's a cost. There's always a cost. Drawing on future mana, calling up Freed, burning herself down to the wick to do it. Janica can't use mana anymore. And she can't see ahead anymore either. Her premonition is gone. Freed carried the 2 of them out of that collapsing tower and then crashed them down into the forest outside Arkan Island, and that was the price of it. That was the bill. And Ed tells her gently, like it actually matters, like it's the most important instruction he's ever given, she should always come to him first. Always. Then a cheeky junior student comes breezing in to tease the disguised young Master Ed, fussing over Janica, needling him, poking at him, until he slips and drops into informal speech and snaps at her, and she pounces on the slip, delighted, and flings the cottage door wide open mid-change just to make Janica shriek her name in horror. And then she drops the act. Silver hair, red star-pupil eyes, it's the Saintess, it's Clarice, living now quietly as a junior student under the name Kylie. And she tells Ed Verdio's been officially excommunicated. The Pope and the Apostles are escorting him back to the Holy Capital under guard, and maybe, just maybe, this is the turning point for the whole church. And she asks Ed for something simple, just treat her as a junior, Kylie, and call on her anytime if he ever needs help. Ed says there's really only one person he wants to thank, the bard, Adele, the girl who vanished. But Clarice couldn't find a single trace of her, so she's left Adele's loot behind, just in case she ever comes back. And then at sunset, Adele comes back. Blonde, eye patch, the real looper, the runner. She walks up to the campfire and she throws her loot straight into the flames. She's done singing lies. She's going to travel to every single place she once lied to Clarice about, the Dempia Swamp, Oldeck, Sylvanus, all of it, and this time not to run from her fate. Not to hide, this time to actually go there, to really live it. She'll be back, she says, 2-3 years before Clarice graduates, and Ed promises to carve her a brand new instrument when she does. A real one. And before she leaves, Adele tells Ed the truth he's been dodging this whole time. He lost his magic. He can't see the future anymore. The determined scenario, the script he memorized, the entire map he's been navigating 2 lifetimes by, it ends here. After this, it's unknown bosses. The dragon, still out there. Horrors he has no notes on, no foresight for nothing. Are you afraid? She asks him. And Ed admits it, yes he is, but that, he says, makes it exciting. And then, alone by the fire, Ed tells you the real truth, the honest one, the one he wouldn't say out loud to anyone with a face. He stood at a crossroads, and he chose to stop the dragon's revival and to sacrifice Adele to do it. That was the trade, he took it. And he confesses, if her divine power had given out a moment too soon, if Lucy hadn't somehow kept her memories across the loops, if the math hadn't worked, if any one number had come up wrong, he would have abandoned Adele, left her to die in that chamber, to save himself. That's the kind of person I am. A flash of the gas mask, the past life. The man who can throw away compassion and duty and friendship and hold survival up like a shield in front of every one of them. He's not pretending to be a hero. He never was. Don't let the firelight fool you. Summer vacation arrives. Ed Rothtaylor is a top student now. Janica is at his side. Lucy has vanished off somewhere the way she does, and despite rewriting history, despite stepping over every single sacrifice the original story demanded of him, somehow against all of it, I have survived. Ed and Janica stand together, under a sky full of fireflies. And that's the end of Season 1. But here's the thing, and this is what makes me genuinely, honestly hungry for more. Ed survived the only way he has ever known how, by knowing the future. The forged death on the cliff, the burned hourglass, the loops, saving Janica, dodging bad ending 27, every single one of those wins came from the script in his head, the map, the notes, the cheat. And the script just ran out. The memorized story is over. The pages are blank now. So for the first time since he opened his eyes in this world, the first time in 2 whole lives, Ed Rothtaylor has no idea what comes next. No notes, no do-overs, no foresight, no hourglass. Just an unknown future, a dragon still out there somewhere in the dark, and a man who already admitted out loud by the fire that he'll throw anyone overboard to make it through. Season 2. And that's the whole of Season 1, start to finish. If you stuck with me all the way to the end of this one, genuinely from me to you, thank you. Drop a like if it earned one. Subscribe so you don't miss Season 2 when it drops, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care.